The woman who walked through death to save her daughter. In the frozen hell of Montana, 1874, a mother carried her dying child through 3 days of blizzard, not to a church, not to a town, but to a man the world had forgotten. She was an outcast. He was a ghost. And between them lay a choice that would shatter everything they thought they knew about mercy, love, and survival. Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment your city below so I can see how far this tale of redemption travels across the world. The wind didn't howl in the Montana wilderness. It screamed. It screamed with the voice of 1,000 murdered dreams, tearing through the lodgepole pines like God's own fury, ripping bark from ancient trees and flesh from any creature foolish enough to stand against it. The snow fell so thick it erased the world, turning earth and sky into one endless sheet of white oblivion. In this frozen cathedral of death, where even the wolves had retreated to their dens and the ravens had fled south, a solitary figure stumbled forward. Clara Jennings was 26 years old, though the mirror, when she'd had access to such luxuries, told her she looked 40. 3 days in the storm had aged her another lifetime. Her dark hair, once carefully pinned in the modest style of a frontier woman, now hung in frozen ropes around a face carved hollow by grief and determination. Ice crystals clung to her eyelashes, her lips had gone blue, and somewhere around the second day, she'd stopped feeling her feet entirely. But she kept walking. She kept walking because stopping meant death, and death wasn't hers to claim yet. Death was already too close to the bundle she clutched against her chest, the small, impossibly light weight of her daughter, Lydia, wrapped in every piece of fabric Clara had owned. The girl's face was gray, her breathing so shallow that Clara had to stop every 100 yards to press her frozen cheek against her daughter's lips, desperate for the whisper of breath that meant one more minute, one more step, one more chance. "Just a little further, baby," Clara whispered, her voice cracking like ice breaking on a river. "Just a little further and we'll be warm, I promise. Mama promises." The promise tasted like ash in her mouth. She'd made so many promises she couldn't keep. She'd promised Keaton she would be strong when the town turned on them. She'd promised her father, before he'd disowned her, that she would see reason and forget that savage. She'd promised herself she could raise a half-Comanche child in a world that saw native blood as a stain to be scrubbed clean with violence and contempt. She'd broken every promise except one. She would not let her daughter die alone in the cold. The storm had started 4 days ago, just hours after the church council delivered their final judgment. Clara could still hear Reverend Thomas Everett's voice, sanctimonious and sharp as a blade, as he stood on her doorstep with 6 men behind him. "Clara Jennings, you have been found unclean in the eyes of God and this community. Your fornication with a heathen, your birthing of a half-breed child, and your continued refusal to repent have marked you as unfit for Christian society. You have until dawn to leave Salvation Creek. If you are found within 10 miles of this town after sunrise, we will take the child and place her in an institution where she might be civilized, and you will face justice for your moral crimes." Justice. They'd called it justice when they beat Keaton to death 2 years ago. They'd called it justice when they burned his body and dumped the ashes in the creek. They'd called it justice when they made Clara watch, 6 months pregnant, screaming until her voice broke. There was no justice in Salvation Creek, only judgment. So Clara had packed what little she owned, blankets, a few jars of preserved vegetables, Keaton's hunting knife, and the small leather pouch of herbs he'd taught her to use, and she'd walked into the night with Lydia bundled against her chest. She had no destination, no plan, only a rumor she'd overheard months ago, whispered between 2 trappers in the general store before they'd noticed her and gone silent. "Crazy bastard up in the Bitterroots," one had said. "War surgeon, they say. Elias Boone. Lost his whole family and went feral. Lives like a hermit in some cabin near Grizzly Pass. Probably dead by now, or wish he was." "Why'd he go up there?" the other had asked. "To get away from people, I reckon. Can't say I blame him. After what they did to his Apache wife." Clara had filed the information away like a precious stone. A doctor in the mountains, a man who'd loved a native woman, a man who might not turn her away. It was a thread-thin hope, but it was all she had. The first day hadn't been so bad. Lydia had been feverish but conscious, her dark eyes open and trusting as Clara sang to her old Comanche lullabies that Keaton had taught her in the firelight of happier times. They'd made perhaps 10 miles, following a hunter's trail that led generally north and west toward the shadow of the Bitterroot Mountains. The second day, the fever spiked. Lydia stopped responding to Clara's voice. Her little body burned like a coal, then went cold, then burned again. Clara had tried everything: cool snow pressed to her forehead, warm blankets, the fever-few tea she'd managed to brew over a pitiful fire in a shallow cave. Nothing worked. By nightfall, Lydia's breathing had turned ragged and wet, a sound Clara recognized with sick horror. Pneumonia. The same rattling wheeze that had taken 3 children in Salvation Creek the winter before. The third day, Lydia stopped crying, stopped moving. Only the faintest flutter of breath against Clara's cheek told her that her daughter's soul hadn't yet fled. That was when Clara had begun to run. She ran through snow that reached her knees, then her thighs. She ran through wind that knocked her down again and again, until her palms were bloody from catching herself on ice and rock. She ran through the gathering darkness of the third night, guided only by instinct and the vague direction of north toward Grizzly Pass. She ran because if she stopped, if she let herself think about the weight in her arms growing colder and stiller with each passing hour, she would lie down in the snow and let the wilderness take them both. And she was not ready to die. Neither was Lydia, not yet, not while Clara still had breath in her body. The fourth dawn broke gray and merciless. Clara stood at the base of a steep ridge, her legs shaking so badly she wasn't sure they'd carry her another step. The wind had finally died to a dull moan, and through the settling snow she could see something dark against the white. A structure of some kind, perhaps half a mile up the slope. Smoke rose from what might be a chimney, thin and gray against the morning sky. "Thank you," Clara breathed, not sure if she was talking to God or Keaton's spirits or simply the mountain itself. "Thank you. Please. Please let him be there. Please let him help us." She started climbing. Every step was an act of will. Her body had moved beyond pain into a strange numbness, punctuated by moments of white-hot agony, her frostbitten toes screaming inside her boots, her shoulders burning from clutching Lydia for so many hours, her lungs raw from breathing frozen air. But she climbed, hand over hand where the slope was too steep to walk, dragging herself over rocks and through drifts, never looking down at the bundle in her arms, because if she looked, if she saw how still Lydia had become, she might not be able to keep moving. The cabin resolved itself from the snow-covered landscape like something out of a fever dream. It was larger than she'd expected. A solid structure of split logs with a covered porch and shuttered windows, a barn or stable built against one side, and what looked like a smokehouse beyond. Signs of life, an axe buried in a chopping block, a neat stack of firewood under the eaves, fresh tracks in the snow leading from the cabin to the barn. Someone lived here, someone who hadn't abandoned this place to the winter. Clara's legs gave out on the last 20 yards. She fell hard, catching herself on her elbows to keep from crushing Lydia, and lay there in the snow for a moment that stretched into eternity. Her vision grayed at the edges. Her heartbeat hammered, irregular and weak in her ears. She thought, with perfect clarity, "This is where I die. I got her here, but I can't make it the rest of the way. I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry." Then she heard the door open. "Christ Almighty!" The voice was rough, unused, like stones grinding together. Clara lifted her head, blinking snow from her eyelashes, and saw a man standing on the porch. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in worn buckskin and a heavy bearskin coat. Dark hair shot through with silver, a beard that hadn't been trimmed in months, and eyes. Even from this distance, Clara could see his eyes, pale as glacier ice and just as cold. Elias Boone. It had to be. Clara tried to speak, but her throat had frozen shut. She tried to stand, but her body refused. So she did the only thing she could. She unwrapped the bundle in her arms enough to reveal Lydia's gray, still face, and she held her daughter up toward the stranger like an offering, like a prayer. The man went rigid. For a heartbeat, Clara thought he would turn and walk back inside, shut the door, leave them to die in his yard. His face had gone white, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping in his cheek. Then he moved. He covered the distance between them in 6 long strides, dropping to his knees in the snow beside Clara. Up close, she could see the scars, a thin white line across his left eyebrow, another along his jaw, the rough, puckered mark of an old burn on the back of his right hand. His eyes swept over Lydia with the focused intensity of a predator sizing up prey, but his hands, when they reached for the child, were shockingly gentle. "How long has she been like this?" His voice was sharp, demanding. 2, 3 days. Clara could barely force the words out. "The fever. I couldn't. The town." "Don't talk. Save your strength." He pulled Lydia fully from Clara's arms, and for one terrible moment Clara tried to hold on, some primal instinct screaming that she couldn't let go, couldn't trust this stranger. But her frozen fingers wouldn't obey, and the man lifted Lydia as if she weighed nothing at all. He held her against his chest, his ear close to her face, his fingers pressing against her throat. Clara watched his expression, trying to read her daughter's fate in the lines of his weathered face. "She's breathing," he said finally, and Clara's sob of relief came out as a broken gasp. "Barely, but she's still breathing. Can you walk?" Clara nodded, though she wasn't sure it was true. The man shifted Lydia to one arm and extended his other hand to Clara. She took it, felt the callous strength of his grip as he hauled her upright. Her knees buckled immediately, and he caught her around the waist, supporting most of her weight as he half-carried, half-dragged her toward the cabin. "What's your name?" he asked as they stumbled through the snow. "Clara Jennings. My daughter, Lydia." "I'm Elias Boone. And I'm going to ask you one question, Clara Jennings, and I need you to answer me truthfully. Can you do that?" Clara nodded. "Did someone do this to your daughter? Is someone hunting you?" Clara's breath caught. She thought of Reverend Everett's cold eyes, the men who'd stood behind him, the barely veiled threats, but she shook her head. Not yet. They gave us time to leave, but if we'd stayed, yes, they would have taken her, put her in an institution, or worse." Elias's jaw tightened, but he said nothing else. They reached the porch, and he kicked the door open, pulling Clara into a wave of blessed warmth that made her gasp and sob simultaneously. The cabin's interior was a blur. A fireplace roaring with heat, rough-hewn furniture, shelves lined with books and bottles and medical instruments. Elias lowered Clara into a chair by the fire, then strode immediately to a long table against the far wall and laid Lydia down with careful precision. "Strip her," he ordered, already moving around the table, lighting lanterns and pulling down jars and tools from the shelves above. "Everything. I need to see her skin, assess the frostbite damage. Can you do that, or are your hands too frozen?" Clara looked down at her hands. They were blue-white, the fingers bent like claws. She tried to flex them and felt nothing, just a distant tingling like they belonged to someone else. But she pushed herself up from the chair and stumbled to the table. "I can do it," she said. "Then do it fast. Every second counts." Clara's frozen fingers fumbled with the layers of fabric she'd wrapped around Lydia. There were so many: blankets, shawls, Clara's own coat, and 2 spare dresses, all bundled and tied to keep the warmth in. As she peeled them away, she began to see the damage. Lydia's lips were gray-blue, her fingertips dark, her small chest barely moving with each shallow breath. But what made Clara's stomach drop was the sound, that wet, rattling wheeze coming from deep in her daughter's lungs. "Pneumonia?" she whispered. "Advanced pneumonia," Elias confirmed, pressing his fingers to Lydia's throat, then her chest, his face grim. "Frostbite on the extremities, severe hypothermia, signs of dehydration. How long since she last drank anything?" Yesterday morning, maybe. She couldn't keep anything down after that." Christ. Elias moved with sudden, fierce purpose, pulling bottles and instruments from the shelves, arranging them on the table with the precision of a man performing surgery. "I need you to listen carefully, Clara. Your daughter is dying. Without intervention, she'll be gone by nightfall. With intervention, she's got maybe a 50-50 chance. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Clara nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Do whatever you have to do. Please, save her." Elias looked at her for a long moment, something haunted flickering behind those ice-pale eyes. Then he nodded once, sharply, and turned back to Lydia. "Get yourself warm," he said, his voice softer now. "There's tea in the pot by the fire, blankets in the chest by the bed. I need you functional, not frozen. Can't save your daughter if I'm trying to keep you alive too." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to stay by Lydia's side, but she recognized the tone in his voice. This wasn't a suggestion. This was a command from a man who knew exactly what he was doing, so she stumbled back to the fire, poured herself a cup of bitter pine needle tea with shaking hands, and wrapped herself in one of the blankets from the chest. It smelled like smoke and herbs and something else, something faintly sweet and sad that she couldn't identify. From the table, she could hear Elias working, the clink of glass bottles, the splash of liquid being poured. His voice, low and steady, murmuring to Lydia as if she could hear him. "Come on, little one. Stay with me. You didn't walk through a blizzard just to quit now. Your mama didn't carry you all this way so you could give up. Breathe. That's it. One breath at a time. Fight for it. Fight." Clara closed her eyes and prayed. She prayed to Keaton's gods and her father's God and any spirit that might be listening in the winter darkness. She prayed with everything she had left, every ounce of strength and hope and desperate, ragged love. "Please, not her. Take me if you want someone. Take me, but let her live. Please." Time stretched and warped. Minutes became hours, became eternities. The fire burned low and Clara fed it with wood from the stack by the hearth, her movements automatic, her gaze never leaving the table where Elias worked over her daughter's small, still form. He'd stripped off his coat, rolled up his sleeves, and his hands moved with the confident precision of a man who'd done this 1,000 times before, checking Lydia's pulse, listening to her lungs, applying poultices to her frostbitten fingers and toes, forcing drops of liquid between her blue lips. At some point, Clara realized she was holding her breath, waiting for Lydia to take hers. And at some point after that, deep into the night, when the wind had finally died to a whisper outside and the world had gone silent as a grave, Elias stepped back from the table. His shoulders sagged, his head bowed, and Clara's heart stopped. "No," she whispered. "No, please, no." She stabilized. Elias's voice cut through her panic like a knife. He turned to face Clara, and she saw the exhaustion carved into every line of his face, the sweat soaking his shirt despite the cold. "Her temperature's coming up. The pneumonia's still dangerous, but I've given her everything I can to help her fight it. The frostbite. She'll likely lose the tips of 3 fingers and 2 toes, but that's better than losing her life. She's not out of danger yet. The next 24 hours will tell us whether she makes it or not. But right now, in this moment, she's breathing on her own, and her heart is beating steady. That's more than I thought we'd get when I first saw her." Clara was moving before she realized it, crossing the cabin to the table where Lydia lay wrapped in clean blankets, her face still gray but somehow less lifeless than before. Clara touched her daughter's cheek with trembling fingers and felt warmth, faint but real. "Thank you," she breathed. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." "Don't thank me yet." Elias's voice was rough. "Like I said, we're not out of the woods, and you—" He studied Clara with the same clinical intensity he'd turned on Lydia. "You're hypothermic too. Not as bad as your daughter, but bad enough. When's the last time you ate?" Clara tried to remember and couldn't. 2 days ago? 3? "Thought so." Elias moved to the stove where a pot of something that smelled like venison and root vegetables simmered. He ladled a bowl full and thrust it into Clara's hands. "Eat. All of it. Then you're going to sleep in my bed while I watch your daughter. And before you argue—" He held up a hand as Clara opened her mouth to protest. "I haven't slept in a bed in 2 years. I sleep in the chair by the fire. The bed's yours. Non-negotiable." Clara looked at him, at this scarred, gruff stranger who'd taken them in without question, who'd fought for Lydia's life as if it were his own. She wanted to ask him why. Why had he helped them? Why did he live alone in these mountains? Why had his eyes gone haunted and distant when he first saw Lydia in her arms? But she was too tired, too wrung out, too grateful to form the questions. So instead, she whispered the only words that mattered. "I came here to ask you to bury my child. And you saved her instead." Elias turned away, his shoulders rigid, When he spoke again, his voice was so quiet Clara almost didn't hear it. "I know what it's like to bury someone you love," he said. "I buried my wife and son 3 years ago. Buried my whole life with them. So when I saw you in the snow, holding that girl like she was the only thing keeping you tethered to this earth." He paused, his hands gripping the edge of the table until his knuckles went white. "I couldn't do it again. Couldn't watch another person lose everything, not if I could stop it." Silence fell between them, heavy with shared grief and the weight of the dead. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the shutters. Inside, the fire crackled and popped. And on the table, Lydia took another breath, then another. Clara ate the stew mechanically, forcing it down even though her stomach rebelled. She was so tired she could barely hold the spoon, but she ate every bite because Elias was right. She needed to be functional. Lydia would need her in the hours and days to come. She couldn't afford to collapse now. When she finished, Elias took the bowl and pointed toward a door at the back of the cabin. "Bed's through there. Go. I'll wake you if anything changes." Clara stumbled to the room, barely registering the simple furnishings. A large bed with a thick quilt, a chest of drawers, a window overlooking the snow-covered forest. She collapsed onto the mattress, still wrapped in her blanket, not even bothering to remove her boots. The last thing she saw before exhaustion dragged her under was the soft glow of lamplight from the main room and the silhouette of Elias Boone standing watch over her daughter. "We're safe," she thought as sleep claimed her. "For now, we're safe." But even in her dreams, she could hear the echo of Reverend Everett's voice, cold and condemning. "We will take the child. You will face justice." And she knew, with bone-deep certainty, that this was only the beginning. Clara woke to the sound of coughing, harsh, wet, desperate coughing that tore through the pre-dawn silence like a saw through bone. She bolted upright, her heart hammering, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar room. Then memory crashed back and she was moving, stumbling through the doorway into the main room where lamplight still burned low and steady. Elias was bent over Lydia, one hand supporting her small back as her body convulsed with coughs that brought up bloody phlegm into a basin he held ready. His face was drawn tight with concentration, his movements sure, despite what must have been hours without rest. He didn't look up when Clara approached, all his attention focused on the child struggling to breathe. "Easy, little one," he murmured, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Easy. Don't fight it. Let it come up. That's it. Good girl." Lydia's eyes were open, fever-bright and unseeing, her small face contorted with pain and confusion. She didn't seem to recognize Clara when her mother reached for her hand, didn't respond to her name, just coughed and coughed until Clara thought surely her daughter's small body would break apart from the force of it. "What's happening?" Clara's voice came out strangled. "I thought you said she was stable." "She is stable. This is her body fighting." Elias finally spared Clara a glance, his pale eyes bloodshot but sharp. "The fever's breaking. All that infection in her lungs needs to come out. It's going to get worse before it gets better." "How much sleep did you get?" Clara tried to calculate and couldn't. The window showed the barest hint of gray light bleeding into the eastern sky. 4 hours? Maybe 5? "Good, you'll need it." He shifted his grip on Lydia as another coughing fit seized her. "There's more stew on the stove. Eat. Then I need you to take over here while I prepare the next treatment." "What treatment?" "Old Apache remedy my wife taught me. Juniper steam with sage and pine ash. We're going to make her breathe it deep, open up those lungs, help her cough up all the poison that's killing her." He met Clara's eyes squarely. "It's going to hurt. She's going to fight it, and you're going to have to hold her down while I do it. Can you do that?" Clara's throat closed. Hold down her daughter while she suffered? Watch her struggle and cry and not be able to comfort her? But she looked at Lydia's gray face, at the bloody foam on her lips, and she knew there was no choice. This was survival. This was love in its rawest, cruelest form. "Yes," she whispered. "I can do it." Elias nodded once, approval flickering in his expression. "Then eat fast. We start in 10 minutes. Clara forced down another bowl of stew, barely tasting it, her eyes never leaving her daughter. Lydia had quieted now, her breathing ragged and shallow, her small chest heaving with effort. She looked so fragile lying there on the rough wooden table, surrounded by bottles and bandages and instruments that spoke of pain and healing in equal measure. Clara wanted to gather her up, hold her close, whisper that everything would be all right, but she couldn't lie to her daughter. Not now. Not when the truth was carved so starkly in every labored breath. Elias moved around the cabin with economical precision, gathering what he needed. He filled a large iron pot with water from a barrel by the door and set it on the stove to boil. From leather pouches and glass jars on the shelves, he measured out dried juniper berries, sage leaves, strips of pine bark, and something that looked like fine gray ash. His hands never hesitated, never fumbled. This was a muscle memory, knowledge worn smooth by repetition. "Your wife taught you this?" Clara asked, watching him work. "She taught me a lot of things." Elias's voice was neutral, carefully stripped of emotion. White medicine's good for bullets and broken bones, but for fevers, for lung sickness, for the kinds of ailments that kill slow. The old ways work better. White doctors, they want to bleed you, give you mercury and opium, make you sicker before you get better. If you get better. My wife, she knew plants. Knew how to read a body, listen to what it needed. She saved more lives in our 5 years together than I saved in 2 years of war surgery. He paused, his hand hovering over a jar of something dark and pungent. The army doctors, they called her a savage, said her remedies were superstition and witchcraft. Then winter came, and half the fort came down with influenza. Suddenly they were real interested in her superstitions. She saved 43 men that winter. You know how they thanked her? Clara shook her head, though she could already guess the shape of the story. They accused her of witchcraft anyway, said she must have cursed them first, then pretended to cure them, said no squaw should have that kind of power over white men's lives. His jaw clenched. The commander's wife started a campaign to have her removed from the fort. For the safety of the children, she said. For the moral character of the community. My superiors gave me a choice. Send my wife away, or resign my commission. What did you do? I resigned. Walked away from 15 years of service without looking back. Took my wife and our son and came here, to the mountains where no one would bother us, where we could live in peace. He measured out the last ingredient with shaking hands. We had 3 good years, 3 perfect years. Then a trapper came through, sick with smallpox. We took him in, nursed him back to health, sent him on his way grateful and alive. 2 weeks later, my son got sick. Then my wife. The trapper, he'd been immune, but they weren't. The water had begun to boil, steam rising in ghostly plumes. Elias dumped the herbs and ash into the pot, and immediately the cabin filled with a sharp, medicinal smell that made Clara's eyes water. He stirred it with a long wooden spoon, his face illuminated by the lamplight, and Clara saw the grief carved into every line, every shadow. This was a man who'd been hollowed out and left empty. A man who'd buried everything that mattered and somehow kept breathing anyway. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I'm so sorry for your loss." "Don't be sorry. Be ready." Elias lifted the pot off the stove with a thick cloth wrapped around the handle. "We're going to put her face over this steam. She needs to breathe it deep for at least 5 minutes, preferably 10. The heat's going to hurt. The smell's going to choke her. She's going to panic and fight. You hold her shoulders, keep her head positioned over the pot. I'll control her arms and monitor her breathing. If she passes out, we stop immediately. Understood?" Clara nodded, moving to the table. She positioned herself at Lydia's head, her hands trembling as they hovered over her daughter's thin shoulders. Lydia's eyes had closed again, her face slack with exhaustion or unconsciousness. Clara couldn't tell which. Elias set the pot on the table, adjusting its position carefully. Steam billowed up, thick and white and heavy with the scent of medicine. He draped a large blanket over a frame he'd constructed from 2 chairs and a piece of wood, creating a tent that would trap the steam around Lydia's face. "On 3, he said, his hands gentle but firm on Lydia's arms. 1, 2, 3. They lifted Lydia together, positioning her so her face was directly over the rising steam. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Lydia's eyes flew open wide, her mouth opening in a gasp of shock and pain as the hot vapor hit her face. She tried to jerk back immediately, but Clara's hands held her in place, her own heart breaking as her daughter began to struggle. "Mama!" The word came out as a raw scream. "Mama, no, it hurts!" "I know, baby, I know." Tears streamed down Clara's face, but her grip didn't waver. "But you have to breathe it. You have to breathe deep. Please, Lydia, please." "Hurts, Mama, please," Lydia thrashed, her small body surprisingly strong in her panic. "Can't breathe, can't—" "Yes, you can." Elias's voice cut through her screams, calm and commanding. "Listen to me, Lydia. Look at me, right here. Look at my eyes." Something in his tone cut through the fear. Lydia's wild gaze fixed on Elias's face, her chest heaving. "That's good. That's real good. Now this is going to hurt. I won't lie to you, but it's going to help. You're full of bad air, sick air, and we need to get it out. This steam, it's going to make you cough. It's going to make you spit up all the poison that's making you hurt. Can you be brave for me? Can you be brave for your mama?" Lydia whimpered, but she stopped fighting quite so hard. Her small hands clutched at Elias's wrists, holding on like a lifeline. "Breathe in through your nose," Elias instructed. "Slow and deep. That's it. Now out through your mouth. Again, in through your nose. Good girl. You're doing so good." Clara watched in amazement as her daughter obeyed, as the panic slowly bled out of her small frame to be replaced by concentration. Each breath made her cough, harsh, productive coughs that brought up more of the bloody phlegm. But she kept breathing, kept following Elias's calm instructions. And slowly, impossibly, the coughs began to sound different, clearer, stronger. The minutes crawled by like hours. Clara's arms ached from holding Lydia in position. Sweat poured down her face from the heat of the steam, but she didn't let go, didn't look away from her daughter's face. She watched the color gradually return to Lydia's lips, watched her breathing become slightly less labored, watched life kindle in her fever-bright eyes. "That's 10 minutes, Elias said finally. "Let's give her a break." They lifted Lydia away from the steam, and Clara cradled her daughter against her chest, rocking her gently as she coughed and cried and shook. Elias brought water, and Clara helped Lydia drink in small sips, washing away the bitter taste of the medicine. "You did so well, baby," Clara murmured, kissing her daughter's damp forehead. "So brave, so strong. Mama's so proud of you." "Hurts," Lydia whimpered. "Everything hurts." "I know, but you're getting better. Can you feel it? You're breathing easier now, aren't you?" Lydia nodded slightly, then coughed again. A deep, rattling cough that brought up a thick wad of yellowish phlegm. Elias caught it in the basin, examining it critically. "Good," he said with satisfaction. "That's what we want to see. The infection's breaking up. We'll do another session in 2 hours, then again at noon. By tonight, you should be breathing clear." "Will she—" Clara couldn't finish the question, couldn't speak the fear aloud. But Elias understood. He met her eyes, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she saw something other than cold efficiency in his face. She saw compassion, maybe even hope. "She's fighting," he said simply, "and she's got you. That counts for more than any medicine I can give her." The day that followed was a blur of steam treatments, cough-racked hours, and brief moments of fragile rest. Between sessions, Clara held Lydia close, singing to her in Comanche and English both, telling her stories about her father, about the home they'd lost and the home they'd find someday. Elias worked tirelessly, checking Lydia's pulse and temperature, adjusting his remedies, forcing spoonfuls of bitter tea between her lips. He moved like a man possessed, driven by something deeper than duty or simple compassion. During one of Lydia's brief sleeps, Clara found Elias standing at the window, staring out at the snow-covered forest. His shoulders were slumped with exhaustion, his hands braced against the window frame like he needed the support to stay upright. "You should rest," Clara said softly. "I can watch her for a while." "Can't rest. Not yet." "You've been awake for, what, 30 hours? More?" "Done longer during the war." But his voice lacked conviction. Clara moved closer, studying his profile. In the gray afternoon light, she could see the toll the sleepless night had taken, the deep circles under his eyes, the lines of strain around his mouth, the tremor in his hands that he couldn't quite control. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You don't know us. You don't owe us anything. So why are you killing yourself to save my daughter?" Elias was silent for so long Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, his voice rough and low. "My son was 4 years old when he died. 4 years old, and all I could do was watch him burn with fever and fade away. I tried everything: white medicine, Apache remedies, prayers to every god I'd ever heard of. Nothing worked. He died in my arms, and my wife, she looked at me like I was a stranger, like I'd betrayed her. 3 days later, she was gone too, and I was alone." He turned to face Clara, and the naked pain in his eyes made her breath catch. "I became a surgeon to save lives. Spent years learning how to put men back together after they'd been torn apart by bullets and bayonets. But I couldn't save my own family, couldn't save the 2 people who mattered most. So I came up here to die. Not all at once, but slow, letting the cold and the loneliness eat me alive. I told myself I was done. No more healing, no more fighting, just waiting for the end. But then we came," Clara whispered. "But then you came, stumbling through the snow with your daughter in your arms, begging me to bury her. And I looked at her face," his voice cracked, "and I saw my son, saw my wife, saw every person I ever failed to save. And I knew I had a choice. I could turn away, let death have another victory, or I could fight. One more time. Even if I fail, even if she dies anyway, at least I'd know I tried." Clara reached out, covering his scarred hand with her own. "You're not going to fail. Look at her. She's breathing. She's fighting. Because of you." Elias stared down at their joined hands, and Clara saw something shift in his expression. A tiny crack in the armor he'd built around himself, letting in the smallest sliver of light. "She's fighting because of you," he said finally. "A mother's love that's stronger than any medicine I know. I'm just helping her find her way back." Before Clara could respond, a sound from the table made them both turn. Lydia was stirring, her eyes fluttering open. And for the first time since Clara had arrived at the cabin, her daughter's gaze was clear, focused, present. "Mama?" The word was hoarse, barely audible, but it was the most beautiful sound Clara had ever heard. She was at her daughter's side in an instant, taking Lydia's small hand in hers. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." "Thirsty?" Clara laughed, tears streaming down her face. "You're thirsty? Oh, thank God. Yes, let's get you some water." Elias brought a cup, helping Clara lift Lydia's head so she could drink. The girl sipped slowly, carefully, keeping the water down. Her eyes moved from Clara to Elias and back again, taking in the strange cabin, the unfamiliar man, the bandages on her fingers. "Where are we?" she asked. "We're safe," Clara said, smoothing Lydia's dark hair back from her forehead. "That's all that matters. We're safe, and you're getting better." "He helped us?" Lydia's gaze fixed on Elias with the uncanny perceptiveness of children. "The man with sad eyes?" Elias froze, something raw and vulnerable flashing across his face. Then he knelt beside the table, bringing himself to Lydia's eye level. "My name's Elias," he said gently. "And yes, I helped you. But you did most of the work yourself. You're a fighter, Lydia Jennings. Your mama raised you strong." "My papa too," Lydia said. "Papa was strong. Papa taught me." She coughed, and Elias quickly supported her through it. When it passed, she continued, her voice small but determined. "Papa taught me to be brave, like the warriors. He said half of me is Comanche, and that makes me strong." "Your papa was right," Elias said, and Clara heard the thickness in his voice. "Being Comanche, being Apache, being any of the people, that's a gift. Don't let anyone tell you different." "You knew the people?" Lydia's eyes widened. "You knew them like Papa?" "I married one of them. Her name was Ayana. It means eternal blossom in Apache. She was the strongest, smartest, bravest woman I ever met. And she taught me that strength comes in lots of forms. Sometimes it's fighting, sometimes it's healing, and sometimes it's just surviving, keeping going when everything tells you to quit." Lydia considered this, her young face serious. Then she reached out with one bandaged hand and touched Elias's scarred knuckles. "Did you quit?" she asked. "When Ayana went to the spirit world?" Elias's breath caught. Clara watched him struggle with the answer, watched him weigh honesty against kindness. Finally, he nodded. Yes, he admitted. I quit. I came up here to hide from the world and wait to die. But then your mama brought you to my door, and... He paused, his pale eyes shining. And you reminded me that quitting's easy. It's fighting that's hard. Fighting for one more breath, one more day, one more chance to make things right. You taught me that, little warrior. You and your mama both. Oh, Lydia smiled, a tiny, fragile thing, but a real smile nonetheless. Then we're all teachers, she said. Papa used to say, everyone teaches everyone if you're paying attention. Your papa was a wise man. I miss him. Lydia's smile faded. I miss him so much it hurts worse than the coughing. I know. Elias's voice was rough with emotion. I miss my family too, every single day. But you know what I learned? The people we love, they don't really leave us. They live on in the things they taught us, the ways they changed us. Your papa, he's still with you, in your strength, in your courage, in the way you fought to stay alive even when it would have been easier to let go. You think he's proud of me? I know he is. And your mama too. She carried you through a blizzard for 3 days, never stopped, never gave up. That's the kind of love that moves mountains, little one. That's the kind of love your papa had for both of you. Lydia's eyes drifted to Clara, who was openly weeping now, unable to hold back the flood of relief and grief and gratitude. Don't cry, Mama. Elias says I'm getting better. I know, baby. These are happy tears. I'm so grateful. So grateful you're here. So grateful we found Elias. So grateful for every breath you take. Me too. Lydia yawned, her eyelids drooping. I'm sleepy again. Is that okay? That's perfect, Elias assured her. Sleep is healing. You rest now, and when you wake up, we'll have some broth and do another steam treatment. Not because you need it as much, but because we want to make sure all that sickness is gone for good. Okay. Lydia's eyes closed, but her hand tightened on Clara's fingers. Stay close, Mama. Please stay close. I'm not going anywhere, baby. Not ever again. Clara held Lydia's hand as her daughter slipped back into sleep. Real sleep this time, not the fever-drenched unconsciousness of before. The change was remarkable. Lydia's breathing was still labored, still rough, but it was steady, strong. The gray pallor had faded from her skin, replaced by the faintest hint of healthy color. She looked like a child again, not a corpse waiting to happen. Elias checked her pulse one more time, then nodded with satisfaction. The crisis has passed, he said quietly. She's not out of danger yet. Pneumonia can relapse, and the frostbite damage will take time to heal. But the worst is over. She's going to live, Clara. The words hit Clara like a physical blow. She'd been holding herself together through sheer force of will, refusing to hope, refusing to believe until she had proof. But now, hearing Elias say it with such certainty, the walls came crashing down. She buried her face in her hands and sobbed, great wrenching sobs that came from the deepest part of her soul, releasing days of terror and grief and desperate, agonizing hope. Elias stood awkwardly for a moment, clearly uncertain what to do. Then, with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rough appearance, he placed a hand on Clara's shoulder. Let it out, he said softly. You've earned the right to fall apart. You kept her alive long enough to get her here. You held her through the worst of it. You were strong when she needed you to be strong. Now you can be human again. Clara leaned into his touch, drawing strength from his steady presence. They stood like that for a long moment, two broken people who'd found each other in the wilderness, bound together by a shared commitment to fight death one more time. When Clara finally raised her head, wiping her face with her sleeve, she found Elias watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Respect, maybe, or recognition. The look of someone who'd walked through hell and found another survivor on the other side. Thank you, she said, her voice raw. I don't have words big enough to thank you for what you've done. You saved her life. You saved both our lives. You would have done the same for me, Elias said simply. That's what decent people do. They help. They fight for each other. They refuse to let the darkness win, even when it seems like the easiest path. Is that why you use their medicine? Clara gestured to the shelves lined with herbs and remedies. The Apache ways? Because it works, or because it's a way of honoring your wife? Both. Elias moved to the shelves, running his fingers over the jars and pouches. White doctors, they think they know everything. Think their book learning makes them superior to knowledge that's been passed down for generations. But the people, they understood something we forgot. They understood that healing's about balance. Mind, body, spirit. You can't treat one without treating all three. The steam treatment I gave Lydia, it's not just about clearing her lungs. It's about giving her something to focus on, something to fight for. It's about showing her that healing hurts, but it's worth it. That's medicine Ayanna taught me, and it saved more lives than all my surgical training combined. He pulled down a small leather pouch and opened it, showing Clara the contents: dried sage, sweetgrass, and something that looked like cedar bark. When Ayanna died, I wanted to burn everything, all her remedies, all her teachings, everything that reminded me of her, but I couldn't do it, because destroying her medicine would have been like destroying her memory, erasing everything she stood for. So I kept it, learned it, used it, even when I swore I'd never heal another soul, and now? He looked at Lydia, sleeping peacefully on the table. Now I'm glad I did. Clara moved closer, studying the herbs with new appreciation. Teach me, she said impulsively. Teach me what she taught you. I want to learn. For Lydia, and for Keaton's memory, too. Elias's eyes widened slightly. Keaton? That was your husband's name? Yes. He was Comanche. Gentle, kind, brave. Everything the town said his people weren't. They killed him for daring to love me, for daring to exist in their world without bowing his head and accepting their hatred. Clara's voice hardened. They called him a savage, called our daughter a half-breed, said she'd be better off dead or in an institution where they could civilize her. But Keaton taught me that civilization isn't about skin color or language or which god you pray to. It's about how you treat people, about kindness and honor and courage. The town that called him savage was the most uncivilized place I've ever known. I understand. Elias's voice was heavy with shared pain. They did the same to Ayanna, feared her because she was different, hated her because she was better than them. The army fort where I served, they used her when they needed her medicine, then spit on her when the crisis passed. Called her a witch, said our son would grow up to be a violent savage because of his mixed blood. As if love could be divided by blood. As if a child could be anything but innocent. They stood in silence, bound by their parallel wounds. Outside, the afternoon light was fading, the sky turning the deep purple gray of winter twilight. Inside the cabin, shadows gathered in the corners, but the fire burned warm and steady. Finally, Clara spoke. You asked me before if someone was hunting us. I said no, but I'm not sure that's true. The town gave us time to leave. But the preacher's son, Thomas Everett, he's the one who led the council against me. He wanted to marry me once before I met Keaton. When I refused him, he never forgave me. I saw it in his eyes when he came to cast me out. This isn't over for him. He'll come looking, eventually, to finish what he started. Elias's expression hardened. Let him come. This is my mountain, my land, and anyone who tries to hurt you or your daughter will learn real quick what kind of savage I can be. The words should have frightened her. Instead, Clara felt only relief. For the first time since Keaton's death, she wasn't alone. Wasn't facing the world's cruelty with nothing but her own worn strength. Why? She asked. Why would you stand against them for us? You don't know us. This isn't your fight. Elias was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but fierce. I couldn't protect my family. Couldn't save them from disease or from the hatred that killed Ayanna's spirit long before the smallpox took her body. I failed them in every way that matters. But I'll be damned if I fail you. You came to my door when you had nowhere else to go. You trusted me with your daughter's life. That makes it my fight. That makes you my responsibility. And I don't abandon my responsibilities. Not anymore. Clara felt tears prick her eyes again, but these were different. Tears of gratitude, of relief, of hope, cautiously rekindling in her battered heart. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the only thing of value she still possessed, a small turquoise pendant Keaton had given her on their wedding day. It was rough cut, imperfect, but beautiful in its simplicity. "Here," she said, pressing it into Elias's hand. "I can't pay you with money, but this was precious to me, to us. Please take it. As thanks and as a promise that we won't forget what you've done, that your kindness means something, that it matters." Elias stared at the pendant, his scarred fingers closing around it carefully. For a moment, Clara thought he would refuse. Then he nodded, slipping it into his pocket. "I'll keep it safe," he said. "And when Lydia's grown, when she's strong and healthy and free, you can give it to her. Tell her it's from her father and from the man who helped save her life. Tell her it's a reminder that good people still exist in this world, even when it seems like the darkness has won." "I will." Clara smiled through her tears. "I promise, I will." Night fell over the mountains, deep and cold and absolute, but inside the cabin, warmth and light held back the darkness. Elias prepared a simple meal of cornbread and beans, and when Lydia woke again, she was able to eat a few bites before exhaustion claimed her once more. Clara ate too, marveling at how strange it felt to have food in her belly, warmth in her bones, and hope in her heart. As they cleaned up after the meal, Clara found herself watching Elias with new eyes. She saw past the scars and the beard and the rough mountain man exterior to the skilled surgeon beneath, the grieving husband, the father who'd lost everything and somehow found the strength to fight for strangers. She saw a man who'd been broken and had put himself back together crooked but functional, like a bone that healed wrong but still bore weight. "What was your son's name?" she asked quietly. Elias paused in his washing, his hands still in the basin. "Samuel. We called him Sam. He had his mother's eyes, dark and bright and full of mischief, always laughing, always curious. Drove me half crazy asking questions about everything he saw. Papa, why is the sky blue? Papa, where do the birds go in winter? Papa, can I be a doctor like you when I grow up?" His voice cracked. "I'd give anything to hear one more question, to see one more smile. He sounds wonderful." He was. They both were. Elias dried his hands roughly. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm being punished, if the universe looked at all the men I failed to save during the war and decided I needed to lose everything I loved to balance the scales." "That's not how it works," Clara said firmly. "Bad things happen to good people all the time. It's not punishment or justice or cosmic balance. It's just life. Cruel and random and unfair. But that doesn't mean we stop fighting. Doesn't mean we give up on finding meaning, finding purpose, finding reasons to keep breathing. Is that what you tell yourself when you think about what they did to Keaton?" Clara flinched at the question, but she didn't look away. "Sometimes. Other times I just rage. I scream and cry and curse God and everyone who stood by and let it happen. But then I look at Lydia and I remember Keaton's still alive in her eyes, her smile, her courage. They can kill the man, but they can't kill what he created. Love doesn't die just because the people who made it are gone. It transforms. It endures." Elias studied her for a long moment, and Clara saw something shift in his expression. A softening, a recognition, a connection forming between two souls who'd survived the unsurvivable. "You're right," he said finally. "Love endures, even when we think it's gone, even when the grief seems like it'll swallow us whole. Love endures. It changes shape, becomes something we barely recognize. But it's still there," Clara finished. "Still real, still worth protecting, still worth fighting for." They held each other's gaze across the small cabin, and Clara felt something warm unfold in her chest. Not romantic love. Not yet. But the beginning of trust, of partnership, of two wounded people finding strength in each other's survival. The night deepened. Elias showed Clara how to mix more of the herbal remedies, teaching her the properties of each plant and how to identify them in the wild. She learned quickly, her mind hungry for knowledge that might keep her daughter alive, that might honor Keaton's memory by preserving the ways of his people. As they worked side by side, their conversation drifted from medicine to memories, from grief to glimpses of hope. And on the table, wrapped in clean blankets and breathing steadily, Lydia slept through the night without fever, without terror, without the rattle of death in her lungs. When dawn finally broke, painting the snow-covered mountains in shades of pink and gold, Clara stood at the window beside Elias and watched the sun rise over a world that had tried its best to kill them. "We made it," she whispered. "We actually made it through. Through the worst of it, anyway." Elias's voice was rough with exhaustion, but there was something lighter in it too. Something that might, someday, become hope. There's still healing to do, still dangers out there. But for now, in this moment, yes, we made it. Clara reached out and took his hand, squeezing gently. He squeezed back, his grip warm and steady and real. Behind them, Lydia stirred and called out softly, "Mama?" Clara turned, her heart full to bursting. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." And as she went to her daughter's side, as she held Lydia close and felt the strong, steady beat of her heart, Clara allowed herself to believe something she'd thought lost forever. She allowed herself to believe in tomorrow. The days that followed took on a rhythm that felt almost like peace. Almost, but not quite, because peace was a luxury neither Clara nor Elias had learned to trust anymore. Still, there was comfort in the routine. Mornings spent checking Lydia's progress, changing her bandages, coaxing broth and tea between her lips. Afternoons of rest punctuated by steam treatments that grew gentler as her lungs cleared. Evenings by the fire, when the work was done and the mountain darkness pressed against the windows like something alive. It was during these evenings that the real healing began, though neither of them recognized it at first. Lydia was sleeping soundly on the fourth night, her breathing finally clear and strong when Clara found herself unable to sit still. She'd been cooped up in the cabin for days, and her body craved movement, purpose, something to do with her hands besides worry. She began tidying without asking, organizing the shelves of medical supplies, sweeping the floor, mending a tear in one of the blankets. Elias watched her from his chair by the fire, saying nothing, but she could feel his gaze following her movements. "You don't have to do that," he said finally. "You're a guest here, not a servant." "I need to be useful." Clara didn't stop sweeping. "I need to feel like I'm contributing something, not just taking. You brought life back into this cabin. That's contribution enough." Clara paused, leaning on the broom handle. "You really believe that? That we brought you something other than trouble and risk?" Elias was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful, almost surprised. "Yes, I do. This place, it's been a tomb for 2 years. I kept it clean, kept the fire burning, kept myself alive, but barely. Just going through the motions because stopping felt like too much effort. Then you showed up, and suddenly I had a reason to use all those medicines I'd saved. A reason to remember what I used to be good at. A reason to..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "A reason to what?" "A reason to care." The words came out raw, unguarded. I'd forgotten what that felt like. Caring whether someone lived or died. Caring enough to fight for it. Clara set the broom aside and moved to the fire, settling into the chair across from him. The firelight cast dancing shadows across his scarred face, softening the hard lines of grief and isolation. She studied him openly, seeing past the defensive walls to the lonely man beneath. "Tell me about her," she said softly. "About Ayana, if it doesn't hurt too much to talk about." Elias's jaw tightened, and Clara thought he would refuse. But then something in him seemed to crack open, like ice breaking under spring sun, and the words began to flow. She was Apache, from a band that had been forced onto a reservation in Arizona territory. She'd watched her people starve on government rations, watched them die of diseases they had no immunity to, watched their children taken away to boarding schools where they beat the Indian out of them. When I met her, she was working as a translator at Fort Union, the only job the Army would give her, and only because they needed someone who could speak both Apache and English well enough to prevent misunderstandings. He paused, his fingers drumming against the arm of his chair in a restless rhythm. I was fresh out of medical school, full of ideals and arrogance. Thought I knew everything because I'd read books and studied cadavers. Then cholera broke out among the Apache families living near the fort, and none of my training meant a damn thing. People were dying faster than I could treat them. I was panicking, exhausted, making mistakes. And Ayana just appeared, walked right into the hospital tent where I was losing my mind and said, "Your medicine isn't working. Try mine." Jansats D. Clara smiled despite herself. I bet that went over well with the other doctors. They wanted to throw her out, called her everything from witch to squaw to things I won't repeat in front of a lady. But I was desperate enough to listen. She showed me how to make a tea from willow bark and wild mint that settled the stomach cramps, how to use clay poultices to draw out the fever, how to brew a tonic that kept patients hydrated even when they couldn't keep water down. Within 3 days, the death rate dropped by half. Within a week, we'd turned the corner on the outbreak. His expression softened, memory painting warmth across his features. After that, she stayed. Said someone had to make sure I didn't kill people with my book learning. We worked together every day, treating soldiers and Apache families both. I taught her what I knew about anatomy and surgery. She taught me about plants and healing traditions that went back centuries. And somewhere in all that teaching and learning, I fell in love with her. What was she like? Clara asked, leaning forward. Beyond the medicine? Elias's smile was small but genuine, the first real smile Clara had seen on his face. Fierce, smart as hell, funny in a dry way that caught you off guard. She didn't suffer fools, didn't apologize for taking up space in the world. And she had this presence about her, like she could see right through your walls to the person underneath. Made you want to be better than you were. He stood abruptly, moving to one of the shelves, where he retrieved a small wooden box. He opened it carefully, revealing a few precious items, a beaded bracelet, a piece of turquoise carved in the shape of a bird, and a small tintype photograph in a tarnished silver frame. He handed the photograph to Clara. The woman in the image was beautiful in an unconventional way. Strong features, dark eyes that stared directly into the camera with unflinching confidence. Long black hair braided with what looked like strips of leather and small shells. She wore a simple dress that was neither fully Apache nor fully white, but something in between. And beside her stood a younger Elias, his arm around her waist, his expression so open and happy it made Clara's heart ache for him. She looks like she could command armies, Clara said softly. She could have, if the world had let her. Instead, they tried to make her small, tried to break her spirit. But Ayana, she refused to break, even when it would have been easier. He took the photograph back, gazing at it with such longing that Clara had to look away. We got married in secret because the army wouldn't recognize mixed marriages. Had Sam a year later. For 5 years we built a life together. It wasn't always easy. Hell, it was mostly hard. The other officers' wives shunned her. The soldiers made crude jokes when they thought I couldn't hear. My own family back in Pennsylvania disowned me when they found out. But none of that mattered because we had each other. What changed? Clara asked, though she already knew the shape of the answer. Everything. Nothing. The same old story that's been playing out since white men first came to this continent. Elias's voice hardened. The fort commander's wife decided Ayana was a threat. To what? I still don't know. But she started a campaign, whisper campaign at first, then more open. Said Ayana was practicing witchcraft. Said our son was dangerous because of his mixed blood. Said I was a disgrace to my uniform for marrying a savage. The commander, he was a political man. Didn't want trouble with his wife or with the Eastern newspapers that were always looking for scandal, so he gave me a choice. Send my Apache wife away or resign my commission. Clara's hands clenched in her lap. And you chose her. I chose us. Chose my family over everything else I thought mattered. We came up here, to this mountain, where no one could touch us. Built this cabin with our own hands, hunted, gathered, lived off the land. Sam was 3 years old, happy and healthy, and free in ways he never could have been near civilization. For 3 years, we were truly at peace. Then that damn trapper showed up, sick and half dead, and we took him in because that's what decent people do. We nursed him back to health, saved his life. 2 weeks after he left, Sam got sick. His voice cracked, and Clara saw him fighting to maintain control. She wanted to tell him to stop, that he didn't have to relive this pain for her sake. But something in his posture told her he needed to speak it aloud, needed to give voice to the grief that had been eating him alive in silence. Smallpox. I knew what it was the second I saw the rash, and I knew we were in trouble because neither Ayanna nor Sam had been exposed before. They had no immunity. I rode down to the nearest town 20 miles through a blizzard, begging for the vaccine. They had it. They had it, but they wouldn't give it to me. Said they couldn't waste medical supplies on Indians. Said if my wife and son died, it was God's judgment for my moral failings. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Dear God, they let them die? On purpose? Not directly. They didn't put a gun to their heads. They just withheld treatment that could have saved them and called it policy. Elias's voice was flat now, emotionless, the tone of a man who'd burned through rage and arrived at something colder. I rode back empty-handed, nursed them the best I could with what Ayanna had taught me, but smallpox doesn't care about herbs or prayers. Sam died first, 4 years old. I buried him on the hillside behind the cabin where he used to play. Ayanna lasted 3 more days, long enough to make me promise I'd keep living, keep using her medicine, keep fighting. Then she let go. Silence fell between them, heavy and absolute. The fire crackled and popped, indifferent to human suffering. Outside, a wolf howled in the distance, its cry lonely and wild. Clara found herself crying without realizing when the tears had started, grieving for people she'd never met, for a family destroyed by the same hatred that had taken Keaton. I'm so sorry, she whispered. Elias, I'm so sorry. No one should have to. That's not even cruelty. That's evil. Pure evil. Yes. He replaced the photograph in its box with careful reverence. It was. And I've spent 2 years trying to understand how people can do that to each other, how they can look at a dying child and choose hatred over mercy. I still don't have an answer. I don't think there is one, really. Some people, they need someone to hate, need someone to feel superior to. And if you're different, different skin, different beliefs, different blood, then you're fair game. Clara wiped her eyes with her sleeve. Keaton used to say something similar. He said white people were afraid because they'd built their whole world on violence, and they knew deep down that violence would eventually come back on them. So they had to keep finding new enemies, new threats, new reasons to justify what they'd done. If they admitted we were all just human, all just trying to survive and love and raise our children, if they admitted that, then they'd have to face what monsters they'd become. Your Keaton was wise. Elias returned to his chair, suddenly looking decades older. Tell me about him. How you met. How you fell in love in a world that wanted to destroy you for it. Clara hesitated, old pain rising like bile in her throat, but Elias had opened his wounds for her. The least she could do was return the honesty. I was 22, traveling with my father from Ohio to Montana Territory. He was a preacher, convinced God had called him to bring civilization to the frontier. My mother had died the year before, and father was drowning in grief and religious fervor in equal measure. Thought if he saved enough souls, God would forgive him for whatever sins he imagined he'd committed. She shook her head at the memory. We were crossing through Comanche territory, stupidly, recklessly, because father refused to wait for a military escort, said God would protect us. God didn't, I'm guessing. No, bandits did. White bandits, ironically enough. They came at us in the night, killed our guide, would have killed us too if Keaton hadn't stopped them. He was scouting for the Comanche chief, monitoring white movement through their territory. He heard the gunshots, came to investigate, and ended up saving our lives, killed 2 of the bandits, scared off the rest, brought us to his camp, where his people fed us and tended our wounds and treated us with more kindness than any white settlement had shown. Clara's smile was sad and sweet at once. Father hated every second of it, kept preaching at them, trying to convert them, telling them they were savages who needed Jesus. But Keaton, he just smiled at me. This quiet, patient smile like he understood something I didn't. And when father finally fell asleep one night, Keaton taught me to speak a few words in Comanche, taught me about his people's beliefs, their connection to the land, made me see that civilization isn't about buildings and books, it's about how you treat each other. You fell in love with him there? Yes, completely, helplessly. We only had 2 weeks together before father insisted we continue to Salvation Creek, But in those 2 weeks, Keaton showed me what real humanity looked like. He was gentle, thoughtful, funny in ways that transcended language. He loved children and animals. He carved beautiful things from wood, birds and horses, and abstract shapes that seemed to move in the firelight. He told me stories about the stars and the spirits and the sacred responsibility everyone has to care for creation. And when Father started preaching at him about hell and damnation, Keaton just said, "Your hell sounds like a place created by men who can't forgive themselves. My people believe in harmony, not punishment." Father nearly had apoplexy. Elias chuckled, a low rumble that seemed to surprise him. "I would have liked your Keaton." "He would have liked you too, would have appreciated your willingness to learn from Ayanna, to honor her ways." Clara's voice thickened with emotion. "When we got to Salvation Creek, Father forbade me from ever speaking about Keaton or the Comanche. Said it was shameful that I'd been so friendly with savages. But I couldn't forget. Couldn't stop thinking about Keaton's smile, his kindness, the way he looked at the world with such reverence and joy. 6 months later, he found me, tracked us all the way to Salvation Creek because he'd felt the same connection I had. He came to ask Father for permission to court me properly. I assumed that went poorly. Father beat him, right there on our porch, in front of the whole town. Called him terrible names, said he'd defile me, that no white woman would ever marry a savage with his consent. Keaton didn't fight back, just took it, then looked at me and said, "I'll wait. However long it takes, I'll wait." Then he left. Clara's hands trembled as she continued. But I didn't wait. I ran away that night, found him camping outside town. Told him I didn't care about Father's consent or the town's approval. We got married under the stars with the spirits as witnesses. No church, no preacher, just our vows to each other. And for 8 months, we were happy. We built a small house on the edge of town, kept to ourselves, tried not to make trouble. Keaton did odd jobs, carpentry, horse breaking, anything that would keep us fed. And I was pregnant, carrying Lydia, feeling her grow inside me like hope made flesh. "What happened?" Elias asked, though his tone said he already knew. "Thomas Everett happened. He was the preacher's son, Father's protege and my former suitor. He'd proposed to me 3 times before I met Keaton, and I'd refused him every time. Not because he was terrible, but because he was empty. All religious performance with no real soul underneath. When he found out I'd married Keaton, he took it as a personal insult, like I'd chosen a savage over him to humiliate him specifically." Clara's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Thomas organized a mob, called it a righteous mission to protect white women from predatory savages. They came to our house one night when Keaton was walking home from a carpentry job in town. They dragged him into the street, beat him with clubs and fists. I tried to stop them. I was 6 months pregnant, screaming, begging. Keaton kept telling me to run, to save the baby. But I couldn't just abandon him." Tears streamed down her face now, uncontrolled and burning. "They beat him to death in front of me. Took hours. And when he was finally gone, when his blood was soaking into the dirt of Main Street, Thomas looked at me and said, 'You brought this on yourself. You and your unnatural lusts.' Then they burned Keaton's body and threw the ashes in the creek like he was garbage, like his life meant nothing." Elias stood slowly and moved to kneel before Clara's chair. He took her hands in his, those scarred, capable hands that had saved her daughter, and held them firmly, grounding her in the present, even as the past threatened to drown her. "Look at me, Clara." His voice was gentle but commanding. "Look at me. What they did to Keaton, that wasn't justice. That wasn't righteousness. That was murder. And you didn't cause it. Thomas and his mob, they're responsible for their own evil. Not you. Never you. But I loved him." The words came out choked. "I chose him, and that choice killed him. No. Hatred killed him. Fear killed him. Small, cruel men who couldn't stand the idea that love doesn't recognize the boundaries they draw. You loving Keaton was the most human, most right thing in that whole damn town. Don't you dare let them make you ashamed of it." Clara sobbed, and Elias pulled her forward into an embrace that was awkward and unpracticed but desperately needed. She cried into his shoulder, releasing 2 years of guilt and rage and grief. And he held her, the scarred mountain hermit who understood her pain because he'd lived his own version of it. And he let her break apart in his arms, knowing she was safe to do so. When the storm finally passed and Clara could breathe again, she pulled back, wiping her face with shaking hands. "I should check on Lydia," she said, her voice rough. "She's sleeping peacefully. I can hear her breathing from here. It's steady and clear. She's fine." Elias returned to his chair but leaned forward, his expression intense. "What happened after they killed Keaton? How did you survive?" "Barely," Clara laughed bitterly. "Father disowned me officially. The church council ruled I was unfit to live among Christians. But they couldn't quite bring themselves to kill a pregnant woman, so they let me stay in Keaton's house on the condition that I never speak to or acknowledge anyone in town. I was invisible. A ghost. I gave birth to Lydia alone, no midwife, no help, just me and Keaton's spirit guides that I prayed to even though I wasn't sure they could hear me. And somehow she lived. Somehow we both lived." She met Elias's eyes across the firelight. "I raised her for 2 years in that house, teaching her about her father, about his people's ways, about love and courage and resistance. I thought if I kept my head down, if I didn't make trouble, they'd eventually leave us alone. But Thomas, he kept watching, kept finding excuses to come by, to remind me that my half-breed daughter was an abomination. Finally, a few weeks ago, he led the church council in declaring that Lydia needed to be taken away for her own good, put in an institution where they could civilize her, make her white, make her forget she ever had a Comanche father. That's when you ran. That's when I ran, with nothing but what I could carry and a rumor of a doctor in the mountains who might help us, who might not turn us away like everyone else had." Clara's smile was tremulous. "I gambled everything on you being a decent man, Elias Boone. And I won." Elias looked down at his hands, flexing the scarred fingers slowly. "I'm not decent. I'm tired of death winning. Tired of watching good people destroyed by hatred while evil men sleep soundly in their beds. When I saw you in the snow with Lydia, I saw a chance to fight back, to save someone that the world had condemned, to prove that their cruelty doesn't have to be the final word." "It doesn't," Clara agreed softly. "It can't be. Because if people like Thomas Everett get to decide who lives and who dies, who belongs and who doesn't, then everything good in the world will eventually be destroyed." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the fire burn low. Clara felt hollowed out, but strangely lighter, as if speaking her truth had released some of the poison she'd been carrying. And Elias seemed different too, less frozen, less withdrawn. The act of remembering Ayanna, of speaking her name and honoring her memory, had brought some small spark of warmth back to his ice-pale eyes. Finally, Clara stirred. "Can I ask you something personal? More personal than what we've already discussed?" But Elias's tone was wry, not defensive. "Why did you keep her medicine? After you swore never to heal again, why not destroy it all?" Elias considered the question carefully. "At first I kept it because I couldn't bear to touch it. Looking at those herbs and remedies hurt too much. Every bottle was a memory, every pouch a reminder of what I'd lost. So I just left them on the shelves, told myself I'd deal with them eventually. But then weeks became months, and I still couldn't do it. Couldn't bring myself to destroy the last physical remnants of Ayanna's knowledge." He stood and moved to the shelves, running his fingers along the jars with something like reverence. "Then I realized something. Destroying her medicine wouldn't honor her memory. It would be the final victory for everyone who tried to erase her, to make her people and their knowledge disappear. The best revenge I could take, the best way I could keep her alive was to preserve what she taught me. Use it, prove that her ways were valid and valuable, even if the world refused to admit it." Clara joined him at the shelves, studying the carefully labeled containers. Willow bark, sage, sweetgrass, cedar, juniper. Each one a piece of knowledge passed down through generations, surviving despite every attempt to destroy it. "Keaton taught me some plant knowledge too," she said. "Not as much as he wanted to. We didn't have enough time. But he showed me how to identify healing plants, how to give thanks before harvesting them, how to prepare them with respect and intention. He said his grandmother had been a healer, that the knowledge was sacred, that every plant had a spirit and a purpose, and our job was to listen and learn. Ayana said the same thing. Elias pulled down a jar of dried purple flowers. This is echinacea. Good for fighting infection, boosting the body's defenses. White doctors are just starting to figure out what the people have known for centuries, and this, he selected a twisted root, is ginseng. Gives strength, helps the body recover from illness or injury. Ayana used to make a tea from it for me when I worked too hard, didn't sleep enough. Said I needed to learn that healing myself was as important as healing others. She was right. She usually was. He replaced the jars carefully. If you want, I can teach you more. Everything Ayana taught me, everything I learned from Apache and Comanche healers over the years. It should be passed on, not buried with me on this mountain. Clara's throat tightened with emotion. I'd like that. I'd like that very much. For Lydia's sake, and for Keaton's memory, and for all of us who refuse to let their knowledge die. Elias extended his hand and Clara took it. They shook firmly, sealing a pact that went deeper than words. A commitment to preserve, to remember, to fight back against erasure in whatever small ways they could. From the table, Lydia stirred and mumbled something in her sleep. Both adults turned immediately, but the child simply rolled over and settled again, her breathing easy and unlabored. Clara moved to check on her anyway, adjusting her blankets and pressing a kiss to her forehead. Lydia's skin was cool now, the fever completely broken. Her bandaged fingers looked less swollen, and when Clara gently touched them, Lydia didn't flinch or cry out. Healing was happening, slowly but surely. She's going to be all right, Clara whispered, more to herself than to Elias. She's really going to be all right. Yes. Elias joined her at the table, studying his small patient with professional satisfaction. Another week of rest and good food, and she'll be strong enough to start moving around. The frostbite damage is healing better than I expected. She'll have scars, shortened fingers and toes, but she'll keep full function. For a child who was half dead 4 days ago, that's a damn miracle. You're the miracle. No, she is, and you are. All I did was give her the chance to fight. She did the rest. He paused, then added quietly, Sam was younger when he got sick, weaker. The smallpox was more aggressive. I tell myself that's why I couldn't save him, that it was already too late by the time I recognized what it was. But part of me wonders if I didn't fight hard enough, if I gave up too soon. Clara turned to face him fully. Elias, you can't think like that. You did everything you could for your son, everything. The fact that you couldn't save him doesn't mean you failed. It means the disease was stronger than any medicine could fight. That's not your fault. Isn't it? I'm a doctor. Saving lives is literally what I trained to do. And when it mattered most, when my own child's life hung in the balance, I couldn't. His voice broke. I couldn't do it. I held him while he died, Clara. Held him and felt his little body burn with fever and turn cold, and I couldn't do a goddamn thing to stop it. I know. Clara gripped his arm, forcing him to look at her. I know what that feels like. I held Keaton while he died too. Felt his blood on my hands and my hair soaking through my dress. Watched the light leave his eyes while he tried to tell me he loved me, that everything would be all right. And I couldn't save him either, couldn't protect him from the hatred that killed him. So I understand that guilt, that feeling of powerlessness. But Elias, listen to me. Sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes being good isn't enough. Sometimes evil wins, and all we can do is survive and keep fighting. Elias's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Is that what we're doing? Surviving? Yes, and it's harder than dying. It's harder than giving up. Every day we choose to keep going, to keep caring, to keep fighting for the people we love. That's an act of defiance. That's how we win. He nodded slowly, processing her words. Then, with visible effort, he straightened his shoulders and wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. You're right. You're absolutely right. Ayana would have said the same thing. She always told me that grief was love with nowhere to go, and the only way through it was to find new places to put that love, new people to care for, new reasons to fight. Like us, Clara said gently. Like Lydia and me. We're giving you a reason to fight again. And you're giving me something I thought I'd lost forever. Elias's voice was rough but sincere. Hope. The possibility that good things can still happen, that not everyone in the world is cruel or indifferent. You remind me why I became a doctor in the first place. Not for glory or money, but because saving lives matters. Because every person deserves a chance to live, to love, to be free. Clara felt tears prick her eyes again, but these were different. Tears of gratitude, of connection, of shared purpose. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing us as people worth saving, for not turning away when it would have been easier. Thank you for trusting me, for giving me a second chance to do right by someone. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew something small. It was the turquoise pendant Clara had given him, Keaton's wedding gift. I want you to have this back. But I gave it to you. I know, and I'll treasure that gift forever. But this pendant, it's not mine to keep. It's Lydia's legacy. A piece of her father that should stay with her family. He pressed it into Clara's hand, closing her fingers around it. Keep it safe. Give it to her when she's old enough to understand what it means, what he meant. Tell her about Keaton's courage and kindness. Make sure she knows her father was a hero, not the savage they called him. Clara clutched the pendant to her chest, overwhelmed by the gesture. I will. I promise, I will. They stood close together in the lamplight, two wounded souls finding strength in each other's survival. Outside, the wind had picked up again, howling through the pines with a voice that sounded almost alive. But inside the cabin, warmth and light held firm. The fire crackled. Lydia breathed steadily, and for the first time since their respective worlds had ended, Clara and Elias both felt something fragile and precious taking root in the ruins. Not happiness, not yet, but the possibility of it. The promise that maybe, somehow, life could be more than just surviving. Maybe it could be living again. As the night deepened and exhaustion finally claimed them both, Clara curled up in Elias's bed while he settled into his chair by the fire, as he'd done every night for 2 years. But before she closed her eyes, she whispered into the darkness, Elias? Yes? Thank you for not letting me bury my daughter. Thank you for fighting when I couldn't anymore. Thank you for being the man Keaton would have wanted protecting us. Silence stretched for a long moment. Then, so quietly she almost didn't hear it. Thank you for reminding me what I'm fighting for. Good night, Clara. Good night. And as sleep pulled Clara under, she dreamed not of death and blood and loss, but of spring coming to the mountains, of snow melting and flowers blooming and new life pushing up through frozen earth, of 3 people, 2 wounded adults and 1 healing child, building something beautiful from the wreckage of their shattered lives. It was just a dream, but it was enough. Clara's dream of spring shattered 7 days later with the crack of a rifle shot. She'd been hanging laundry on a line Elias had strung between 2 pines behind the cabin, humming one of Keaton's old songs while Lydia played in a patch of sun-warmed snow nearby. The girl was still weak, still healing, but strong enough now to sit up and laugh and build small snow creatures with her bandaged hands. The sound of her daughter's laughter had become Clara's favorite music, proof that they'd survived, that life could contain joy again. The shot came from the east, echoing off the mountains like thunder. Clara's hands froze on the wet shirt she'd been pinning, every muscle in her body going rigid with primal fear. Lydia looked up from her snow rabbit, confusion clouding her dark eyes. Mama? What was that? Clara dropped the laundry and ran to her daughter, scooping her up despite Lydia's protests. Inside, now, don't argue. She was halfway to the cabin door when Elias burst out, his face grim and his hands already reaching for the rifle he kept mounted above the doorframe. His eyes met Clara's, and she saw her own fear reflected there, sharpened by understanding. This wasn't a hunter's shot. This was a warning. Get Lydia to the back room, he ordered, his voice clipped and military. Bar the door from inside. Don't come out no matter what you hear, understand? Elias, what? Now, Clara, move. The urgency in his tone broke through her paralysis. She ran inside with Lydia, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. In the back room, she set Lydia on the bed and immediately began dragging Elias's heavy wooden chest in front of the door. Her hands shook so badly she could barely grip the handles. Mama, you're scaring me. Lydia's voice was small, thin with fear. What's happening? I don't know, baby, but we're going to be quiet and stay here until Elias says it's safe. Can you do that for Mama? Lydia nodded, her eyes huge in her pale face. Clara pulled her close, wrapping them both in a blanket, and pressed her ear against the door. From outside, she could hear voices, multiple voices, men's voices, rough and angry, and getting closer. Through the thin walls, she heard Elias's voice, calm and cold as winter ice. That's far enough. State your business. Our business is with the woman and the half-breed child. We know they're here. The voice was familiar, sickeningly familiar. Thomas Everett. Clara's blood turned to slush in her veins. We've been tracking them for a week. Your smoke gave you away, hermit. Now hand them over peacefully, and we'll leave you in peace. There's no woman or child here, just me and my solitude. You gentlemen are trespassing on private property. I suggest you turn around and head back down the mountain before this gets ugly. We're not leaving without them. Another voice, older and harder. Clara recognized it too. Reverend Everett, Thomas's father, and the man who'd presided over her expulsion from Salvation Creek. That woman is a fornicator and a blasphemer. The child is an abomination that needs to be civilized. We have a moral obligation to take them back, and no mountain hermit is going to stop us. Clara heard Elias's rifle cock, the metallic click impossibly loud in the mountain stillness. I said no, and I mean no. That woman and her daughter are under my protection. You touch them, you answer to me. Laughter erupted from the men, cruel and mocking. Clara counted at least 5 distinct voices, maybe 6. Too many. Far too many for one man to fight, even one as capable as Elias. Your protection? Thomas's voice dripped with contempt. You're 1 against 6, old man. You really want to die for a whore and her savage spawn? Been dead for 2 years already. Dying again don't scare me much, but I'll take at least 3 of you with me, and I guarantee you'll be first, boy. So ask yourself, is your pride worth a bullet through the skull? The certainty in Elias's voice sent chills down Clara's spine. This wasn't bravado or bluffing. This was a man who'd already lost everything, who had nothing left to fear and nothing left to lose. A man who'd chosen his line in the snow and would die defending it. Clara made a decision. She couldn't let Elias sacrifice himself for them, couldn't let another good man die because of her choices. She started to move the chest away from the door, but Lydia grabbed her arm with surprising strength. No, Mama, he said, stay here. Baby, I can't let him. He knows what he's doing. Papa would say, trust the warrior who knows the battlefield. Lydia's voice was steady despite her fear, echoing Keaton's wisdom with heartbreaking accuracy. We stay. We trust. Clara hesitated, torn between maternal instinct and the truth in her daughter's words. Before she could decide, the situation outside exploded into violence. Someone, probably Thomas, must have made a move because suddenly Elias's rifle cracked and a man screamed. Not a yell of surprise or anger, but the high, thin scream of someone in mortal agony. Then chaos erupted. More shots, men shouting, the sound of something heavy hitting the ground. Through the door, Clara heard boots pounding across the porch, heard the cabin door slam open, heard furniture crashing. She pressed her hand over Lydia's mouth, holding her daughter close as they huddled in the corner, barely breathing. Male voices filled the main room, loud and aggressive. Where is she? Where's the woman? Find her. Search every room. What about the hermit? Left him bleeding in the snow. He's done. Clara's vision grayed at the edges. Elias. They'd hurt Elias. Maybe killed him. And it was her fault. Her presence that had brought violence to his sanctuary. Her past that had reached out with bloody hands to destroy the fragile peace they'd built. Boots approached the bedroom door. The handle rattled, but the chest held firm. A fist pounded against the wood, making both Clara and Lydia jump. I know you're in there, Clara. Thomas's voice right on the other side of the door. Come out. Make this easy. We're taking the child to the missionary school in Helena, where she belongs. You can come quietly and face your punishment, or we can drag you out. Your choice. Go to hell, Clara spat before she could stop herself. Thomas laughed, but there was no humor in it. Still got that mouth on you, I see. That's all right. We'll teach you proper submission soon enough. Maybe a few nights in the church cellar will remind you of your place. And when we're done with you, when you're properly repentant, Maybe I'll even marry you myself. Make an honest woman out of you, though God knows you don't deserve the mercy." Clara's stomach turned. She'd rather die than submit to Thomas Everett, rather throw herself off a cliff than let him touch her or take Lydia. She looked around desperately for a weapon, anything she could use to defend them. Her eyes landed on Elias's medical kit. Scalpels, surgical tools, sharp and deadly in the right hands. She grabbed a scalpel just as something heavy slammed into the door, splintering the wood. The chest scraped backward an inch. Another impact, and the door cracked down the middle. They were coming through, and Clara had seconds at most to prepare. She pushed Lydia behind her, pressing her daughter flat against the wall. "Don't look, baby. Whatever happens, close your eyes and don't look." "Mama, no!" The door exploded inward, the chest tipping over as two men forced their way through. Thomas came first, his face flushed with triumph and rage. Behind him, a younger man Clara didn't recognize, probably one of his followers from the church. Thomas's eyes locked onto Clara, and something ugly and possessive flickered in their depths. "There you are. Been looking for you for a week, Clara. You led us on quite a chase." He took a step forward, and Clara raised the scalpel, her hand shaking but her resolve iron hard. "Don't come any closer. I swear to God, Thomas, I will cut you." "With that little blade?" He laughed, but his eyes were wary. "You really think you can stop us? There's 6 of us and 1 of you. Be reasonable. Put down the knife, hand over the child, and maybe we'll go easy on you." "You'll have to kill me first, and even then, I promise I'll take a piece of you with me." Thomas's expression hardened. "So be it. Jackson, grab the kid." The young man moved to circle around Clara, reaching for Lydia. Clara slashed at him with the scalpel, catching his forearm and opening a shallow cut. He yelped and jumped back, clutching the wound. "Bitch, cut me. And I'll do worse if you try again." Clara's voice was steady despite her terror. "Lydia is my daughter. You have no right to her, no authority. You're nothing but kidnappers hiding behind religion." "We're doing God's work," Thomas snarled. "That half-breed needs to be saved from herself, saved from your corrupting influence. We're giving her a chance at civilization, at redemption. You should be grateful." "Grateful? You murdered her father, beat him to death in the street while I watched, and now you want me to be grateful that you're stealing my child?" Clara's laugh was bitter and broken. "You're not doing God's work, Thomas. You're doing the devil's." Thomas's face went purple with rage. He lunged forward, grabbing for Clara's wrist. She twisted away, slashing again, but he was faster than she expected. His hand closed around her throat, slamming her back against the wall with enough force to drive the air from her lungs. The scalpel clattered to the floor. "You self-righteous whore," he hissed, his face inches from hers, his breath hot and rancid. "You think you're better than me? Think you can reject me, humiliate me, run away with a savage and face no consequences? I'm going to enjoy breaking you, Clara. Going to enjoy every moment of teaching you your proper place." Clara clawed at his hands, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision. Through the roaring in her ears, she heard Lydia screaming, heard Jackson laugh, heard her daughter cry out, "Mama, no!" Then a gunshot split the air, and Thomas's grip went slack. He stumbled backward, his eyes wide with shock, a red stain spreading across his shoulder. Clara collapsed to her knees, coughing and gasping, her vision clearing just enough to see Elias standing in the doorway. His face was a mask of blood, his left arm hanging useless at his side, but his right hand held his pistol steady, and his eyes burned with lethal focus. "I told you," Elias said, his voice deadly calm. "Touch my family, and you answer to me." Thomas looked down at his shoulder, at the blood pumping between his fingers, and let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "Your family, these aren't your... They're mine now, and you just made the last mistake of your miserable life." Elias's finger tightened on the trigger. "Get out, take your men and get off my mountain. You've got 30 seconds before I stop aiming for shoulders and start aiming for skulls." "You shot me! You actually shot me!" Thomas's voice rose to a shriek. "That's assault! That's attempted murder! We'll have the law on you. We'll..." "The law?" Elias's laugh was harsh and humorless. "You came onto my property, attacked a woman and child under my protection, and you want to talk about law? Go ahead. Bring the sheriff up here. Bring a whole posse. I'll tell them exactly what you did, and we'll see who they believe. A war veteran defending his home, or a pack of religious zealots hunting a widow and her sick child? Jackson had already edged toward the door, his wounded arm clutched to his chest. Thomas, we should go. He's crazy. He'll kill us all. Damn right I will. Elias cocked the hammer for emphasis. 20 seconds. Thomas looked from Elias to Clara to Lydia, his face twisted with impotent rage. For a moment, Clara thought he might charge anyway, might prefer death to defeat, but self-preservation won out. He backed toward the door, pressing his hand to his bleeding shoulder. This isn't over, he spat. We'll be back, with more men, with authority. And when we come, you'll hang for this, Boone. You and the whore both. Looking forward to it. Now get out before I change my mind about letting you live. Thomas fled, Jackson scrambling after him. Through the broken doorway, Clara could hear shouting from outside, the sounds of the other men mounting horses and riding off in panicked disarray. Then silence, broken only by Lydia's soft sobbing and Elias's ragged breathing. Elias swayed, his face going gray beneath the blood. The pistol slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor. He took one step forward, then his knees buckled. Clara lunged forward, catching him before he hit the ground, though his weight nearly took them both down. Elias, oh God, how bad is it? Where are you hit? Rifle butt to the head, he mumbled, his words slurring. Probably cracked my skull, and my arm, shoulders dislocated, maybe broken, hard to tell through the pain. Clara lowered him as gently as she could, propping him against the wall. Blood matted his hair, streaming down the left side of his face from a vicious gash above his temple. His left arm hung at an unnatural angle, and she could see bone-deep bruises already forming on his ribs where someone had kicked him. He'd taken a brutal beating, and yet he'd still come back, still fought for them. Lydia, bring me the medical kit, the big one from the shelf. Hurry, baby. Lydia scrambled to obey, her small hands shaking as she retrieved the leather bag. Clara opened it with practiced efficiency, pulling out clean cloth for bandages, alcohol for disinfection, needle and thread for the head wound. She'd watched Elias work enough over the past week to have some idea of what needed to be done. This is going to hurt, she warned, as she poured alcohol over the gash on his scalp. Elias hissed through his teeth but didn't pull away. Done worse to myself shaving drunk. Just clean it good. Head wounds bleed like bastards, but they're usually not as bad as they look. Clara worked quickly, her hands steadier than she'd expected. She cleaned the wound, noting with relief that while it was deep, it hadn't fractured the skull beneath. The bleeding was already slowing. She threaded the needle with surgical silk and began stitching, her movements careful but confident. Where did you learn to do that? Elias asked, watching her through half-closed eyes. Watched you work on Lydia. Watched my mother stitch up my father more times than I can count. And Keaton, he taught me a little. Said a healer should know how to put people back together. Her voice caught. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry they hurt you. This is my fault. I brought them here. Stop. Elias's good hand caught her wrist, stilling her work. This isn't your fault. You didn't beat me. You didn't bring violence to my door. They did. Evil men making evil choices. Don't you dare take that burden on yourself. But if you hadn't come, I'd still be half dead and waiting for the rest. You gave me something to fight for, Clara. Something to live for. That's worth a cracked skull and a dislocated shoulder any day. Clara finished the last stitch and tied it off, then moved to examine his shoulder. Even without medical training, she could see it was badly dislocated, the joint sitting wrong beneath the skin. Elias followed her gaze and grimaced. That needs to be set, soon, before the swelling gets too bad. I don't know how to... I'll talk you through it. It's going to hurt like hell and I might pass out, but it needs to be done. He looked at Lydia, who was watching with wide, frightened eyes. Little warrior, I need you to be very brave right now. Can you do that for me? Lydia nodded solemnly. Good girl. Go get me that leather belt hanging by the door, and the whiskey bottle from the top shelf in the kitchen. This is going to be loud, and I don't want to scare you more than necessary. While Lydia fetched the items, Elias instructed Clara on how to relocate his shoulder. She listened carefully, trying not to think about the pain she was about to cause him, focusing instead on the technical details. Angle, leverage, rotation, speed. When Lydia returned, Elias folded the belt and bit down on it, nodding for Clara to proceed. She gripped his arm as instructed, planted her foot against his ribs for leverage, and pulled. The sound of the joint popping back into place was audible even over Elias's muffled scream. He went rigid, his good hand clenching into a fist, sweat breaking out across his face. Then it was done, and he sagged back against the wall, breathing hard through his nose. Clara quickly fashioned a sling from a torn sheet, immobilizing the arm against his chest. Then she grabbed the whiskey and pressed it to his lips. He drank deeply, coughing as the liquor burned down his throat. "Good," he rasped once he could speak again. "That's good. You did good, Clara. I hurt you. You fixed me. There's a difference." He took another pull from the bottle, then looked toward the broken doorway. "They'll be back." Thomas meant what he said. He's not the type to accept defeat gracefully. "I know." Clara's jaw tightened. "Which means we need to leave. Tonight. We can't stay here and wait for them to return with reinforcements." "No." Elias's voice was firm despite his injuries. "We're not running. This is my home. My land. I've run enough in my life and I'm done. If they come back, we'll be ready." "Elias, be reasonable. You're injured. We can't fight off a dozen men." "We won't have to. This mountain, it's got teeth if you know how to use them. Natural choke points, places where we can defend with small numbers. I've spent 2 years learning every trail, every hiding spot, every advantage this terrain offers. If they come, we'll make them regret it." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to insist they flee while they still could. But looking at Elias's face, battered but determined, bleeding but unbowed, she understood. This wasn't just about the cabin or the land. This was about standing ground after years of retreat. This was about refusing to let hatred win one more time. "All right," she said quietly. "We stay. We fight. But you need to rest first. Let me clean the rest of these wounds. Get you properly bandaged. Then we'll plan our defense." Over the next hour, Clara tended to Elias's injuries with growing confidence. The head wound was the worst, but the others were mostly bruises and minor cuts. Nothing life-threatening, though he'd be sore and weakened for days. Throughout the treatment, Lydia stayed close, handing Clara supplies and watching with the serious concentration of a child learning important lessons. When the work was done and Elias had been moved to his chair by the fire, Clara finally allowed herself to examine her own throat. Purple bruises in the shape of Thomas's fingers were already forming on her pale skin. It hurt to swallow, hurt to talk, but nothing was broken. She'd survive. Lydia climbed into Clara's lap, wrapping her small arms around her mother's neck. "I was so scared, Mama. I thought they were going to take me. Thought I'd never see you again." "I would never let that happen." Clara held her daughter tight, breathing in the sweet smell of her hair. "Never, baby. I would die first. Papa died trying to protect us. I don't want you to die too. I don't want Elias to die either." Lydia pulled back, her dark eyes shining with tears. "Why do they hate us so much? What did we do that was so bad?" Clara's heart broke anew. How did you explain hatred to a child? How did you make sense of something that made no sense at all? You didn't do anything wrong, sweetheart. Nothing. They hate because they're afraid. Afraid of anything different, anything they don't understand. And instead of trying to learn, trying to see that we're all just people trying to love and live and be happy, they choose to destroy what scares them. But that's their failing, not yours. Never yours. Keaton would say they're out of harmony, Elias added quietly. That's what Aiyana used to tell me when people were cruel. She said everyone and everything in the world is supposed to exist in harmony, like instruments in a song. But some people, they refuse to find their note. They'd rather make noise and call it music, rather than do the hard work of learning to play together. Lydia considered this, her young face thoughtful. So we're in harmony, the three of us? Yes, little warrior, I think we are. Or we're learning to be. Then I'm glad they didn't take me. I want to stay in harmony with you and Mama. Clara and Elias exchanged glances over Lydia's head, and something passed between them. An understanding, an acknowledgement, a promise. They'd become a family without meaning to. Three broken people who'd found each other in the wilderness and discovered they fit together. Not perfectly, not without rough edges and old wounds, but fit nonetheless. As night fell over the mountain, Clara barricaded the broken door as best she could while Elias directed her from his chair. They moved furniture, stacked firewood, created obstacles that would slow any future attack. Elias explained his defensive strategy, how the cabin's position on high ground gave them advantage, how the narrow approach meant attackers could only come at them a few at a time, how the surrounding forest provided cover and escape routes if needed. If they come in force, they'll likely come at dawn, Elias said, checking his rifle with his good hand. That's when men feel bravest, when they've spent all night convincing themselves they're doing the right thing. We'll hear them coming, no way to approach quietly through this forest. That'll give us time to position ourselves, time to prepare. And if we can't hold them off, then we run. There's an old mining trail half a mile north that leads down to the Flathead Valley. It's rough, but we can navigate it even in winter. We get to the valley, we can disappear into the settlements there, but I don't think it'll come to that. Thomas, he's a coward at heart. So's his father. They talk big about righteousness and duty, but neither of them has the stomach for real violence. Today proved that, soon as I shot back, they ran. Clara hoped he was right, but she couldn't shake the memory of Thomas's face, twisted with rage and humiliation. Wounded pride could be more dangerous than courage, she knew. Men like Thomas, men who defined themselves by power over others, they didn't forgive insults like today's. They didn't forget. That night, Clara insisted Elias take his bed, while she and Lydia slept in the main room where she could watch the door. She dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound. The wind in the pines, an owl's call, the crack of settling wood. Beside her, Lydia slept deeply, exhausted by fear and relief in equal measure. And from the back room, Clara could hear Elias's breathing, steady and strong despite his injuries. They'd survived. They'd fought and bled and survived. And tomorrow, if necessary, they'd do it again. Because that's what families did. They protected each other. They stood together against the darkness. They refused to let hatred win, no matter how many times it came knocking at their door. Clara touched the turquoise pendant around her neck, Keaton's pendant, returned to her by a man who understood its significance. She thought of her husband, wondered if his spirit could see what had happened, if he approved of the strange new family she'd found in these mountains. She hoped he did. Hoped he understood that loving Elias wasn't betraying Keaton's memory, but honoring it, carrying forward the values he'd died defending. As dawn approached and the first gray light began to seep through the windows, Clara heard Elias stirring. She rose quietly and checked on him, finding him awake and alert despite the pain that creased his face. "How do you feel?" she asked softly. "Like I got trampled by a buffalo. But I'll live." He attempted a smile. "Thanks to you." "We're even then. You saved Lydia. I saved you. That's how this works now." "I suppose it is." His pale eyes held hers, and Clara saw warmth there, affection, something deeper than simple gratitude. "Clara, when this is over, when we've dealt with Thomas and his mob, I want you to know you're welcome here, both of you, for as long as you want to stay. This cabin, it's big enough for 3, more than big enough, and I like having you here, like having a family again." Claire's throat tightened with emotion. "I like being here, like having someone who sees us as people, not problems, who fights for us instead of against us." "Always," Elias said simply. "I'll always fight for you. That's a promise I intend to keep." Outside, a raven called, harsh and clear in the cold morning air. Clara moved to the window, scanning the forest for any sign of movement. Nothing. Just snow and trees and the vast, indifferent wilderness that had nearly killed them and had somehow saved them instead. "They're not coming today," she said, more feeling than certainty. "No, but they'll come, and when they do, we'll be ready." Clara turned back to Elias, to this scarred, stubborn man who'd given them sanctuary when the whole world had turned away. "Together," she said. "Together," he agreed. And as the sun finally crested the mountains, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, 3 survivors prepared to face whatever came next, not as separate, broken people, but as something stronger, something forged in pain and tempered by love, a family worth fighting for. They didn't come that day or the next. A week passed in tense watchfulness, every sound scrutinized, every shadow examined for threat. But the mountain remained quiet save for the wind and the wolves and the ordinary sounds of wilderness life. Clara began to wonder if perhaps Thomas had given up, if the bullet in his shoulder had taught him the lesson his pride had refused to learn. Elias knew better. "He's waiting," he said on the 8th morning as Clara changed the dressing on his head wound. The gash was healing cleanly, the stitches holding firm. Letting his shoulder heal, gathering more men, building his case for why righteous Christians need to storm a hermit's cabin and kidnap a child. He'll make it sound noble, make himself the hero. That's how men like him operate. So what do? Just wait? We prepare, and we live. Because waiting for death is its own kind of dying, and I'm done with that. So they lived. Clara learned the rhythms of mountain existence under Elias's patient instruction. How to read the weather and the behavior of animals and the taste of the wind. How to preserve meat in the smokehouse, render fat for candles and soap, process hides for clothing and blankets. How to identify edible plants even under snow. How to set snares for rabbits and ptarmigan. How to split wood efficiently and stack it to dry properly. The work was hard, endless, but Clara found satisfaction in it. Every skill learned was another step towards self-sufficiency, another guarantee that she could keep Lydia safe no matter what came. Elias taught her medicine too, fulfilling his promise to pass on Ayana's knowledge. They spent long evenings by the fire while he explained the properties of different plants, showed her how to prepare tinctures and poultices, described symptoms and treatments for everything from snakebite to pneumonia. Clara absorbed it all hungrily, her mind sharp and her motivation fierce. This knowledge could mean the difference between life and death for Lydia, could honor both Keaton and Ayana by keeping their traditions alive. Lydia healed with the remarkable resilience of children. Within 2 weeks, she was walking around the cabin, helping with simple chores, laughing at Elias's gruff jokes. The frostbite damage had scarred her. 3 fingers on her left hand and 2 toes on her right foot were shortened, the tips black and dead tissue that Elias had carefully debrided. But she adapted quickly, learning to grip and balance with her changed body, never complaining about the pain. She called Elias Uncle now, the title emerging naturally one morning and sticking. He'd flushed with emotion the first time she said it, turning away to hide tears he thought no one should see. They rebuilt the broken door together, all 3 of them working in companionable silence. Elias directed while Clara and Lydia measured and cut and sanded, and when they finally hung the new door on its hinges, it felt like more than simple carpentry. It felt like a declaration. This place was theirs now, their home, and they would defend it. The attack came on the 23rd day after Thomas's first attempt, in the gray hour before dawn when the world hangs suspended between night and day. Clara woke to Elias's hand on her shoulder, his finger pressed to his lips in the universal gesture for silence. She nodded, understanding, and quietly roused Lydia, wrapping the girl in a blanket and moving her to the back room as they'd practiced. Lydia went without protest, old enough now to understand that survival sometimes meant sitting still in the dark and trusting the adults to handle danger. "How many?" Clara whispered when she returned to the main room where Elias crouched by the window, his rifle ready. 8 that I've counted. Maybe more waiting back in the trees. They're trying to surround the cabin, cut off escape routes. Amateur strategy. They're making too much noise, breaking too many branches. City men playing at frontier justice. Clara took up position at the other window with Elias's spare rifle, a weapon she'd learned to handle over the past weeks. Her hands were steady, her breathing controlled. Fear was there, cold and sharp in her belly, but so was resolve. She would not be taken. Lydia would not be stolen. And Elias would not die defending them if she could prevent it. The first man emerged from the trees as the sun broke over the eastern peaks, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but his intent unmistakable. He carried a rifle and moved with the exaggerated caution of someone who'd never actually been in combat. Behind him came others, 6, 7, 8 men spreading out in a rough semicircle around the cabin. Clara recognized Thomas immediately, despite the bandage still visible on his shoulder. Reverend Everett was there too, his face set in lines of grim righteousness. The others were strangers, probably men Thomas had recruited from surrounding settlements with promises of moral superiority and adventure. "Clara Jennings!" Thomas's voice rang out across the snow. "We've come to take custody of your daughter under authority of the Territorial Church Council and the moral laws of God. Send her out peacefully, and you won't be harmed. Resist, and we'll take her by force and you'll hang for kidnapping and corruption of a minor." "That's rich," Elias muttered, "accusing her of kidnapping her own child." Clara called back, her voice clear and hard. "Lydia is my daughter, not your property. You have no authority here. Leave, or face the consequences." "The only authority we need is righteousness," Reverend Everett declared, stepping forward with a Bible held aloft like a shield. "That child is half savage, born of fornication and sin. She must be civilized, must be taught proper Christian values away from her mother's corrupting influence. We do this out of love, Clara. Love for the child's immortal soul." "You murdered her father out of love too, I suppose?" Clara's voice shook with rage. "Beat him to death and called it righteousness? There's nothing godly in what you're doing, nothing moral. You're just cruel men hiding behind Scripture to justify your hatred." "Enough talk." Thomas raised his rifle, aiming it at the cabin. "Last chance, Clara. Send out the girl, or we come in and take her." Elias's response was to fire a shot that kicked up snow 3 feet in front of Thomas, close enough to make him jump backward with a startled yelp. "Next one goes through your other shoulder, then I start aiming for knees. You've got 10 seconds to get off my land before I stop being polite." For a moment, uncertainty rippled through the assembled men. They'd expected a frightened woman and an injured hermit, not organized resistance. But Thomas rallied quickly, his pride wounded more deeply than his shoulder. "Take the cabin! In the name of God and decency, take the cabin!" The men surged forward, and chaos erupted. Elias fired again, the bullet catching one attacker in the thigh and sending him sprawling. Clara aimed carefully and squeezed her trigger, the recoil slamming into her shoulder as the rifle cracked. Her shot went wide, but it was close enough to make 2 men dive for cover behind trees. Elias fired twice more in rapid succession, his aim deadly despite his still healing shoulder. Another man went down screaming, clutching his shattered knee. The attackers scattered, seeking cover, returning fire wildly. Bullets punched through the cabin walls, sending splinters flying. One shattered the window Clara was shooting from, forcing her to duck as glass rained down. But Elias had prepared for this. The cabin was built from thick logs that stopped most rifle rounds, and they'd positioned heavy furniture as additional barriers. "They're trying to flank around the barn," Elias observed, his voice calm despite the violence. "I'll take the left window. You stay here and keep them pinned in front. Don't waste ammunition. Only shoot when you have a clear target." Clara nodded, her heart hammering but her hands steady. She'd never imagined herself capable of this, shooting at human beings, fighting a small war from the cabin windows. But maternal instinct was stronger than civilized restraint. These men had come to steal her daughter, and she would kill every last one if necessary. The fight settled into an ugly stalemate. The attackers had numbers but no military experience and no stomach for sustained casualties. They'd expected easy victory, not coordinated defense. Every time they tried to advance, rifle fire from the cabin drove them back. But Elias and Clara couldn't hold out forever. Ammunition was limited, exhaustion would eventually set in, and all Thomas needed was patience. An hour passed. Then 2. The sun climbed higher, warming the snow and turning the battlefield into a mix of white drifts and churned mud. 3 of the attackers were wounded badly enough that they'd been pulled back behind the tree line. The others had gone quiet, and Clara couldn't tell if that meant they were regrouping or giving up. "Something's wrong," Elias said quietly. "They're too quiet. Thomas isn't smart enough to wait us out, and his father's too self-righteous to retreat. They're planning something." He was right. 10 minutes later, smoke began to rise from the barn. They'd set it on fire, hoping either to burn the cabin too or to force its defenders out into the open. Clara's heart sank as she watched flames catch and spread, consuming the structure that housed Elias's horse and winter supplies. But Elias just nodded grimly. "Let it burn. The cabin's far enough away, and there's snow everywhere. Fire won't spread. But they've just destroyed their own credibility, burning a man's livelihood over a custody dispute? That's going to be hard to justify to any lawman." As if summoned by Elias's words, a new voice cut through the morning air. "This is Sheriff William Garrett of Flathead County. Everyone drop your weapons and step away from the cabin. Now!" Clara's head snapped toward the source of the voice. Emerging from the northern trail came a group of horsemen, 5 men with badges gleaming on their chests, led by a grizzled lawman with a face like weathered granite. Relief flooded through Clara so intensely she felt dizzy. Thomas and his men hesitated, caught between retreat and defiance. Reverend Everett stepped forward, his voice booming with false authority. "Sheriff Garrett, thank God you're here. This hermit and his accomplice have kidnapped a child and— Save it, Reverend." The sheriff's voice was flat and unimpressed. "I've been tracking you boys for 2 days, ever since word reached town that a church mob was heading into the mountains to take a woman and child by force. That's vigilante justice, and I don't tolerate it in my county. Now drop your weapons, or I start arresting people for assault, arson, and attempted kidnapping." "But the child is a half-breed. She needs to be with her mother, who has every legal right to raise her as she sees fit. There's no law against interracial marriage in Montana territory, no law against having mixed children, and sure as hell no law allowing church councils to steal kids from their parents." The sheriff fixed Reverend Everett with a hard stare. "You've committed multiple crimes here today, Reverend. Only reason I'm not arresting all of you is because some of your boys are bleeding pretty bad and need medical attention. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to gather your wounded, mount up, and ride back to Salvation Creek. And you're going to stay there, because if I see any of you in these mountains again, I will throw you in jail and lose the key. Are we clear?" Thomas started to protest, but his father grabbed his arm, finally recognizing defeat. "We're clear, Sheriff. We were misguided in our methods. Heat of righteousness, you understand? We meant no real harm. Tell that to the men who got shot. Tell that to Mr. Boone's barn, which you burned in broad daylight." The sheriff spat in the snow. "Get out of my sight before I change my mind about those arrests." The men retreated, gathering their wounded and stumbling back toward their horses. Thomas threw one last venomous look at the cabin, his face twisted with impotent rage, but he went. Within minutes, they were gone, disappeared into the forest like a bad dream fading in daylight. Sheriff Garrett dismounted and approached the cabin slowly, his hands visible and empty. "Mr. Boone? Mrs. Jennings? You can stand down. Threat's over." Elias opened the door cautiously, rifle still in hand but lowered. Clara stood behind him, suddenly aware of how she must look. Wild-haired and wild-eyed, dressed in men's clothes with gun oil on her hands and determination carved into every line of her face. "Sheriff," Elias said evenly, "good timing. Few more hours and this would have gotten uglier." "I can see that." Garrett surveyed the damage. Bullet holes, shattered windows, the burning barn. "Hell of a stand you made. How many wounded?" "3 of theirs seriously, 2 more with minor injuries. None on our side, though my barn's a loss." Elias's jaw tightened. "They came to take the woman's daughter, claimed religious authority. I suggested they reconsider. With bullets, from the looks of things." But there was no condemnation in the sheriff's voice, only weary understanding. "Can't say I blame you. Man's got a right to defend his home and his family from unlawful assault. Just make sure next time you let the law handle it before shots get fired." "There won't be a next time," Clara said firmly. "Thomas Everett has tried twice now to take my daughter. Twice he's failed. Word will spread about what happened here today. Other men with similar ideas will think twice before coming for us." Garrett nodded slowly. "You might be right about that, ma'am. Still, you should know. Technically, what happened here today was a firefight between civilians. I'm inclined to rule it self-defense, but there'll be questions. Reports to file. Maybe an inquiry if Reverend Everett pushes it, though I doubt he will. Man's smart enough to know an inquiry would expose his own crimes." "What do we need to do?" Elias asked. "Come into town in a few days when things settle. Give statements. I'll need to document the scene, take down what happened from your perspective. But unofficially?" The sheriff lowered his voice. "Between you and me, you did the right thing. I've known Thomas Everett since he was a boy, and he's always been a self-righteous prick who thinks God gave him authority over everyone else. About time someone taught him different. Just don't spread it around that I said so." Clara felt something loosen in her chest, tension she'd been carrying for so long she'd forgotten it was there. "Thank you, Sheriff, for coming, for stopping them, for treating us like people instead of problems." "Just doing my job, ma'am. Law's supposed to protect everyone, not just the folks who look and think like the majority." He tipped his hat. "I'll send someone up in a few days to take those statements and check on you. Meanwhile, you need anything, supplies, help rebuilding that barn, you let me know. County owes you at least that much for the trouble those zealots caused." After the sheriff and his deputies left, Clara and Elias stood in the churned snow surveying the damage. The barn was a total loss, still burning, though the flames were dying now. The cabin was peppered with bullet holes, windows shattered, the door frame splintered where someone had tried to force entry. But they'd held. They'd survived, and this time they'd done more than survive. They'd won. Lydia emerged from the back room, her dark eyes huge but calm. She'd heard everything, understood everything, and now she walked straight to Elias and wrapped her small arms around his waist. "You kept us safe, Uncle, just like you promised." Elias's good arm came around her, holding her close. Over her head, his eyes met Clara's, and something passed between them. Exhaustion and relief and affection and gratitude all tangled together. They'd become something neither had expected or planned for, a family forged in fire and blood, held together by shared trauma and shared hope. The days that followed were busy with repair and recovery. They salvaged what they could from the barn, buried the horse that had died in the fire, and began planning a new structure for spring. Neighbors Clara didn't know existed began appearing, trappers and prospectors and other mountain folk who'd heard about the siege and wanted to help. They brought lumber, nails, food, stories of their own encounters with self-righteous townsfolk who thought isolation meant lawlessness. A community emerged from the wilderness, rough and unpolished, but genuine in its support. True to his word, Sheriff Garrett returned a week later to take statements. He documented everything methodically, asked pointed questions about Thomas's previous violence against Keaton, and left with promises that the Everetts would face consequences for their actions. Clara didn't believe charges would stick. Men like Reverend Everett were too well-connected, too respected in certain circles. But the public humiliation of retreat would wound their pride, and that was victory enough. Winter deepened into its coldest months, but the cabin remained warm and bright. Clara taught Lydia to read and write, using Elias's small library of medical texts and adventure novels. Elias taught them both about surgery and anatomy, turning their evening lessons into dark entertainment as he described battlefield amputations and creative solutions to gruesome injuries. They laughed together, cooked together, survived together, and slowly, the wounds, physical and emotional, began to heal. One night in late February, after Lydia had fallen asleep, Clara found Elias standing at the window, staring out at the snow-covered landscape. She joined him silently, following his gaze to where moonlight painted the world in silver and shadow. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. "About how strange life is. 2 months ago, I was waiting to die, had convinced myself I was done, that there was nothing left worth living for. Then you showed up, half frozen and desperate, and suddenly I had purpose again, had people who needed me. And now—" He trailed off, shaking his head. Now I'm happy. Actually happy, for the first time since Ayanna died. And I'm terrified that I'll lose it again, that something will come along and destroy this fragile peace we've built." Clara took his hand, his scarred, capable hand that had saved her daughter and defended their home. "Nothing's permanent. We both know that. The world's cruel and random and unfair, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't grab happiness when we find it. Doesn't mean we shouldn't build something beautiful even knowing it might not last forever." "Is that what we're building? Something beautiful?" "I think so. A family, a home, a life worth protecting." She hesitated, then added, "Keaton used to say that love isn't about forever. It's about now, about choosing each other today, in this moment, without guarantees about tomorrow. I loved him with everything I had, and losing him nearly destroyed me. But if I'd known how it would end, I still would have chosen him, still would have loved him, because those 8 months with him were worth the lifetime of grief that followed." Elias was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. Then he turned to face her fully, his pale eyes catching the lamplight. "I'm not Keaton. Can't replace him. Wouldn't try. I'm not asking you to. I'm not asking you to be anything except who you are. A scarred, stubborn, impossibly kind man who saved my daughter and gave us sanctuary when we had nowhere else to go. That's enough. More than enough. And if I said I wanted more, that I've been thinking about us, about what we could be if we stopped being so afraid of losing again, Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd been feeling the same pull, the same tentative hope, but hadn't dared voice it. I'd say I've been thinking about it too. About how you look at Lydia like she's precious instead of problematic. How you teach us without condescension. How you make this cabin feel like home instead of just shelter. I'd say that somewhere between fighting off zealots and learning plant medicine, I started falling in love with you. Elias's breath caught. Clara, I'm not asking for promises or forever. I'm just asking for now, for today, for this moment where we're both alive and together and happy despite everything the world threw at us. She reached up, touching his face gently, tracing the scar above his eyebrow. Can that be enough? Instead of answering with words, Elias leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle and tentative, the kiss of two wounded people learning to trust again, learning that it was possible to love after loss. Clara melted into it, her hands coming up to tangle in his hair, and for a long, perfect moment, the world contracted to just the two of them. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Elias rested his forehead against hers. It's enough, he whispered. God help me, it's more than enough. You're more than enough. They stood like that for a while, wrapped in each other and the quiet peace of the mountain night. From the bedroom they could hear Lydia's soft breathing, innocent and trusting. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the churned earth in bullet scars, making the world clean and new. Spring came late to the mountains that year, but when it finally arrived, it brought transformation. The snow receded slowly, revealing tender shoots of green pushing through frozen earth. Ice melted from the streams, turning them into rushing torrents, full of promise and power. And in the clearing around Elias's cabin, a new barn began to rise, built by 3 pairs of hands working in harmony. Lydia had grown stronger, taller, more confident. Her shortened fingers barely slowed her down, and she'd learned to navigate the world with her changed body like she'd been born to it. She helped Elias in his garden, planting seeds and learning the names of herbs. She helped Clara with cooking and cleaning, her small voice filling the cabin with songs in both English and Comanche. And she called them both by names that felt right, Mama and Uncle, though everyone who saw them together knew they were becoming something more. Word had spread throughout the region about the siege at Boone's cabin. The story grew in the telling. Sometimes Elias had held off 20 men single-handedly. Sometimes Clara had shot 3 attackers herself. Sometimes Lydia had fought alongside them with a tiny pistol. The truth was less dramatic, but more meaningful. They'd stood their ground. They'd protected their family, and they'd won. Thomas and Reverend Everett never came back. Clara heard through passing travelers that Thomas had left Montana entirely, gone east to lick his wounds and rebuild his reputation. His father remained in Salvation Creek, but diminished, his moral authority shattered by the failed assault. The church council had quietly dissolved, its members embarrassed by the violence they'd sanctioned. Clara felt no satisfaction in their downfall, only relief. The past was finally truly past. On the first truly warm day of May, Elias did something unexpected. He carved words into the old pine tree that stood sentinel beside their door, working carefully with his good hand while Clara and Lydia watched. When he finished and stepped back, Clara read the inscription and felt tears prick her eyes. She's still breathing, and so am I. Simple words, but they contained multitudes. They were Elias's first words about Lydia, his acknowledgement that she'd survived against impossible odds. But they were also a declaration for himself, that he was alive, truly alive, not just existing, but living with purpose and joy and love. That grief hadn't won. That death hadn't claimed him despite his willingness to surrender. It's perfect, Clara whispered. It's true. Elias wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. We're all still breathing, still fighting, still here. Lydia reached up and took both their hands, creating a small circle of connection. Uncle, are we going to stay here forever? In this cabin? On this mountain? Elias knelt so he was eye level with her. Would you want to? Or would you rather go somewhere else, see new places, have adventures? Lydia considered this with the seriousness of childhood. I like it here. It's quiet and safe, and the trees talk to me like Papa said they would. But maybe someday we could visit other places. See what's beyond the mountains? Someday, yes. When you're ready. When we're all ready. Elias glanced at Clara. There's a whole world out there, and not all of it's cruel. There are good people, kind people, places where mixed families can live without fear. Maybe someday we'll find one of those places, but for now we're home, Clara finished, and home is enough. They went inside together, leaving the door open to let in the spring air and the sound of birdsong. Clara started dinner while Elias tended his healing garden, and Lydia played with the kitten one of the neighbors had brought as a gift. Ordinary sounds, ordinary moments, the kind of peace that people take for granted until it's ripped away, the kind of happiness that only survivors truly appreciate. As evening fell and they gathered around the table to eat, Clara looked at the faces of her chosen family. Elias with his scarred hands and gentle eyes, Lydia with her father's smile and her mother's determination, and felt something settle deep in her chest. Contentment, maybe. Or hope. Or simply the recognition that they'd survived not just physically but spiritually, that they'd refused to let hatred poison them, refused to let loss define them. Keaton and Aiyana were gone, but their love endured in the people they'd shaped, the knowledge they'd shared, the values they'd defended. And Sam, though Clara had never met him, lived on in every child Elias treated with tenderness, every small hand he guided with patience. The dead were not forgotten, but neither were they anchors dragging the living into darkness. They were lights, guiding stars, reminders of what was worth fighting for. That night, after Lydia had been tucked into bed with a kiss and a story, Clara and Elias sat by the fire as they did every evening. But tonight felt different, charged with possibility and promise. Elias reached into his pocket and withdrew something small, a wooden carving, smooth and beautifully crafted. A bird in flight, its wings spread wide, every feather detailed with painstaking care. "I made this," he said, pressing it into Clara's hand. "For you. It's not much, but I wanted you to have something that represents what you are, what you've become. A survivor who didn't just endure but learned to fly again." Clara cradled the carving, overwhelmed by the artistry and the sentiment. "It's beautiful. When did you have time to make this?" "Late at night, when my shoulder ached too much to sleep, gave me something to do with my hands, something to create instead of just surviving." He covered her hand with his. "Clara, I know we said we'd take things slow. Just focus on today. But I need to say this. I love you. I love Lydia. I love the family we've become. And if you'll have me, not as a replacement for Keaton, but as myself, I'd like to make this permanent. Make us permanent." Clara's throat closed with emotion. "Are you proposing?" "In my clumsy way, yes. I know it's fast. I know we've only been together a few months. But I've already died once, Clara. Spent 2 years being dead while my heart kept beating, and you brought me back to life. So I don't want to waste time being cautious or sensible. I want to grab this happiness with both hands and hold on tight." Clara set the carving down carefully, then took both of Elias's hands in hers. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it. Yes to being a family officially. Yes to building a life together. Yes to love and hope and fighting for happiness, even when the world says we shouldn't have it." They sealed the promise with a kiss that tasted of tears and joy in equal measure. And from the bedroom, though neither adult heard it, Lydia smiled in her sleep, safe and warm and loved. The wedding happened a month later, performed by a traveling preacher who cared more about love than propriety. Sheriff Garrett stood as witness, along with a handful of mountain neighbors who'd become friends. There was no fancy dress, no elaborate ceremony. Just 2 scarred survivors promising to face life together, to protect each other and the child they both loved, to honor the dead by living fully. Clara wore wildflowers in her hair and Keaton's turquoise pendant around her neck. Elias wore his only good shirt and a smile that transformed his weathered face into something almost youthful. And Lydia stood between them, holding both their hands, her presence a bridge between past and future, grief and joy, loss and love. As they spoke their vows under the vast Montana sky, Clara thought of Keaton watching from the spirit world. She hoped he approved, hoped he understood that loving Elias didn't diminish what they'd had. Love wasn't finite, wasn't a resource that depleted when shared. It multiplied, it transformed, it endured. The years that followed were not without challenges. Money was often tight, winters were harsh, and prejudice didn't disappear just because they'd won one battle. But they faced everything together: drought and illness, difficult seasons and narrow escapes, moments of despair and moments of transcendent joy. They raised Lydia with stories of both her fathers, taught her the medicine of two cultures, gave her roots deep enough to weather any storm. Other children joined them, two more, both adopted from situations similar to Clara's own. A half Lakota boy whose mother had died in childbirth and whose white family wanted nothing to do with him. A full-blooded Apache girl rescued from a boarding school that was slowly killing her spirit. The cabin expanded to accommodate them, rooms added on as needed, and what had been a hermit's lonely refuge became a bustling home full of laughter and life. Elias trained all the children in medicine, passing on everything Ayanna had taught him and everything he'd learned in his years of practice. Clara taught them reading and writing, history and languages, both English and the tongues of their various peoples. And together, they created something rare and precious, a family that transcended blood and race and the narrow definitions society tried to impose. On the 10th anniversary of the day, Clara had stumbled into Elias's clearing half dead and desperate. They gathered around the carved pine tree to read the inscription together. The words were weathered, but still legible, still true. She's still breathing, and so am I. Lydia, now a young woman of 12, traced the letters with gentle fingers. Do you remember that day, Mama? When you carried me through the blizzard? Every detail, every desperate step, every prayer I whispered that you'd survive. I remember parts of it, Lydia said softly. The cold, the sound of your heartbeat, the man with kind eyes who told me to breathe. She smiled at Elias. You saved my life, Uncle. Both of you did. You saved ours too, Elias said gruffly. Gave us a reason to keep fighting when we'd both given up. That's what family does. We save each other. They stood together in the mountain sunshine, this patchwork family built from broken pieces, and Clara felt a contentment so profound it bordered on peace. The world was still cruel, still unjust, still full of people like Thomas Everett who would harm others to maintain their own sense of superiority. But there were also people like Sheriff Garrett, like the mountain neighbors who'd helped rebuild the barn, like every stranger who'd shown kindness when they could have shown contempt. That night, after the children were asleep and the cabin was quiet, Clara and Elias sat on the porch watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, not a sound of threat but of simple existence, announcing its presence to the wilderness. Do you ever regret it? Elias asked. Choosing this life? Staying here instead of going somewhere safer, somewhere you wouldn't have to fight so hard just to exist? Clara considered the question honestly. Sometimes I wonder what life would have been like if Keaton had lived, if we'd been able to raise Lydia without hatred chasing us, or if we'd gone further west to California maybe, where mixed families are more common. But regret? No, never. Because this life, this family, it's ours. We built it together from nothing. We fought for it, bled for it, refused to surrender it no matter how many times the world tried to take it away. That makes it precious in a way that easy things never could be. You're a wise woman, Clara Boone. She smiled at the name, her third name, after Jennings and Keaton's surname that she'd never formally taken. I'm a survivor. We both are. And we taught our children to survive too, but also to thrive, to find joy in small things, to fight for what matters, to love fiercely and protect ruthlessly and never, ever apologize for existing. Ayanna would have loved you, Elias said suddenly, would have recognized you as kin, not by blood, but by spirit. Two women who refused to be broken, who loved to cross boundaries the world said shouldn't be crossed. I wish I could have met her, learned from her directly instead of through your memories. She's in everything I taught you, every remedy, every technique, every bit of plant knowledge. That's her legacy, living on through you and through our children. The people have a saying, we are our ancestors' dreams made flesh. Well, you're making her dreams real. Keeping her medicine alive, passing it forward, that's more than I ever hoped to do. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars multiplied overhead, the Milky Way spreading across the sky like a river of light. And Clara thought about dreams, her own dreams of safety and family, Keaton's dreams of a world where love mattered more than blood, Ayana's dreams of her healing knowledge surviving despite attempts to erase it, Elias's dreams of redemption and purpose. All those dreams, shattered and reformed, had somehow woven together into this moment, this life, this love. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was theirs, and it was real, and it was enough, more than enough. In the cabin behind them, 5 children slept safely, each one carrying the knowledge and values of the people who'd loved them enough to fight for them. In the forest around them, the mountains stood eternal and indifferent, a witness to both atrocities and miracles. And on the old pine tree, words carved in hope and truth and defiant survival caught the starlight and held it. She's still breathing, and so am I. They were still breathing, still fighting, still loving, still building something beautiful in a world that told them they shouldn't exist. And they would keep breathing, keep fighting, keep loving for as long as strength remained. Because that's what survivors did. That's what family meant. That's what hope looked like when you carved it from the wreckage of everything you'd lost and everything you'd gained. A home built from silence and blood and love. A family forged in fire and snow. A future claimed breath by breath, day by day, one small victory at a time. And it was enough. God, it was enough.